Good evening, everyone. I'd like to welcome all of you to the December 2nd regular meeting of Council. I'd like to first recognize that we are on the traditional territory of the Snuneymuxw First Nation. Our clerk tonight will be Ms. Sheila Goury. Question period sign-up sheet is on the partition wall near the gallery. If during the course of the meeting you have an interest in asking a question regarding an agenda item only, would you please write down your name and the agenda item on the sheet, and I'll call you up at the question period at the close of the meeting tonight. And the first item on the agenda is the introduction of late items, Ms. Goury.
Thank you, Worship. And there is a couple extra that aren't listed on the addendum this evening from the Special Finance and Audit Committee this morning, so hopefully this is clear. For the ones that are listed on the addendum, agenda item 9A, delegations, we're adding delegations from Deborah Frias. I apologize if I'm pronouncing that incorrectly. And that is for noise pollution from Nanaimo Bar located at number 275 Front Street. For agenda items 13A and 13B, we're adding a delegation from Janina Stayich and Maeve O'Brien, from Equal Voice Central Vancouver Island. So today, Your Worship, there was a Special Finance and Audit Committee meeting, and Council, the Finance and Audit Committee made some recommendations. So those can be added to under the consent items from the previous committee recommendations as a separate consent item list. And those recommendations are that Council increase the bylaw enforcement officer schedule from 35 hours to 40 hours per week, and that the increase be partially funded from parking revenues with the rest to be funded from taxation. And that Council remove the Council Contingency Fund from the 2020 draft budget, that the emergency medical responder training be funded from the Strategic Infrastructure Reserve in 2020, and that the Deputy City Clerk position be added to the draft budget. So those are two separate recommendations to be voted on separately as additionally added consent items.
Very good, thank you.
And then I believe there's a member of Councillor Turley, that would like to add a late delegation.
Councillor Turley.
Yes, Your Worship, I would like to, I don't know if it's a motion I make or, a motion to allow Rosemary Taylor as a late delegation on items 13A and 13B.
Is there a seconder? Seeing no seconder, no motion. So the next, yes?
I would like to request that we move item 13.2 before item 10A.
Sorry, you want to move item 13?
To be up in the agenda to just after 9 and before 10.
Is there a seconder?
I'll second.
Any discussion? Councillor Armstrong.
I think that's going to be too long. And I would prefer to make sure that we get the amendments that are required for staff to move forward with it first, which would be, that would be 10 G, H, I, J, K. Those are very important that get done, in my opinion, and not wait for 2 weeks. Thank you.
Any further discussion on the motion to amend the agenda by moving items 13 up to after item 9? All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries.
Now it's just the remainder of the agenda. Thank you.
I was just going to say, motion for the approval of the agenda as amended. Seconded, Councillor Brown. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. I would ask for a motion for the adoption of the minutes as circulated. Moved, Councillor Bonner. Seconded, Councillor Hemmens. All those in favor? Thank you very much. The next is the Mayor's report. I want to welcome all of you here tonight, particularly because it's our E-Town Hall. This is, I understand, the 10th E-Town Hall meeting on subjects relating to the budget, core services review, and strategic priorities. The first was held back in March of 2013, and Nanaimo was awarded a bronze for innovation management by the Institute of Public Administration of Canada for it. So we're carrying on in a very positive tradition. I think many of you are also well aware of the Metro Drive redesign unveiling, which is, I think, is met with almost universal approval and represents a significant step forward in ensuring that there's an active transportation route for everybody in the North End all along Metro Drive at a not insubstantial cost, but of great benefit to the community. I'm also pleased tonight to confirm that the following individuals have been appointed to the Economic Development Task Force. From the council side, Councillor Turley will be our councillor rep. Douglas Backhouse, Chris Beaton, Kathy Carr-Leal, or it might be Lyle, I'm not sure, the way it's spelled, Jolien Green, Mike Hooper, Ian Marr, Bob Moss, Erilyn Thomas, who is now properly speaking Erilyn Joseph, Deborah Saucier, Kim Smythe, and Andre Sullivan. So that, the purpose... And sorry? You know, I hate to tell you, Councillor, but they didn't list you on here. Yes, you are. Yes, you are. I'm just teasing. The purpose of the Economic Development Task Force is to oversee the creation of the new economic development strategy and to fully develop the ownership, funding, governance, staffing, and other elements of the city-owned Nanaimo Prosperity Agency. This fulfills a commitment of council to come up with a new economic development model for the community, and I think we're all looking forward to ensuring that Nanaimo's current prosperity doesn't see too many bumps in the road in its future. And finally, a very timely safety reminder, winter's on its way. We're asking citizens to prepare for winter weather and reminding property owners or occupants are required to remove snow and ice from sidewalks in front of their properties within 24 hours so that pedestrians have a safe place to walk and can stay clear of oncoming traffic. The city will clear sidewalks around parks, bridges, commuter trails, and major city facilities as quickly as staff can get to them. But we're asking citizens to exercise extreme caution when using trailways alongside riverbanks in high-flow conditions. Obviously, during the winter season, the City of Nanaimo focuses on maintaining good winter driving conditions on Priority 1 routes, emergency routes, and all major roads, Priority 2 routes, secondary roads, and Priority 3 routes, residential cul-de-sacs and dead ends. A little reminder, when snowplows and salt trucks are operating, drivers must keep back a safe distance and may not pass. To help plows clear a wider path on roads, residents can park in their driveways or even on sides of the road on even days and on odd sides of the road on odd days. Bylaw 5000, Section 22, Sub 1 requires residents and businesses, as I say, to keep clear sidewalks of snow and ice within 24 hours of a snowfall or freeze. And residents can also help minimize flooding by keeping the catch basins in front of their own homes free of leaves, debris, snow, and ice if it is safe to do so. And when possible, we're encouraging residents to stay home during times of heavy snow or icy roads. That is my report for tonight. We are now on to presentations, and that is the E-Town Hall section of this. So we will begin the portion of the meeting dedicated to E-Town Hall, focusing on the 2020-24 draft financial plan. Ms. Farokhi will be our MC tonight, and as they say in showbiz, take it away, Ms. Farokhi.
Thank you, Your Worship. I want to thank everyone for being here tonight, and for those of you watching online, thank you for joining us. My name is Farnaz Farokhi. I am the Manager of Communication with the City of Nanaimo, and tonight we've got something really exciting going on from an online perspective. We are using special technology so that we can go live on Facebook. So for the nearly 15,000 followers on Facebook, you're probably seeing a notification that says we are live. So we'd like to invite you to join us for tonight's E-Town Hall. It's about the, as His Worship said, the 2020 to 2024 financial planning budget. And this allows you to have the opportunity to ask questions about the budget. Before we get to questions, I have just some housekeeping rules, and that includes how you can join us and also ask your questions. So for the audience members, I'm going to be asking, I'll be taking questions from audience, so please feel free to come forward and take a stand at the podium and ask your question. For those of you online, if you can see the screen, if you're on Twitter, you can post your question on Twitter and use the hashtag NanaimoTH. For those of you on Facebook, you can either submit your questions on the E-Town Hall event page, or On the live feed, you can post your comments there. We have moderators in the back who are going to be monitoring the questions and feeding them to me. And of course, we also have the link to our website. So if you go to our website, there's directions as to how you can submit through the city's website there. Now, in regards to questions, we're going to keep the answers to 5 minutes. And if you have multiple questions, for those of you in the audience, we'll come back. We just want to make sure that everyone has a chance to ask their first question. We are going to look at having this e-town hall for about an hour, but I'll check in with His Worship around 8 p.m. to see how we're doing with the questions. So without further ado, I'd like to start by asking an audience member to come up and ask a question. Go ahead.
Good evening. My name is Paul Fruworth. In 2018, a $300,000 pedestrian transportation improvements unallocated fund was established to accelerate pedestrian priority projects. As you know, staff approaches the mayor and council to make recommendations as to how to allocate the funds that amount to $3.33 per capita. It has been reported that the cost of building sidewalks can be very high, although some research indicates a wide variation in the actual costs. So in 2019, the $300,000 pedestrian fund was used to establish a multi-use trail where a pedestrian sidewalk already existed at the Halliburton Road project. The use of this fund did not add any benefit for pedestrian infrastructure. There are many sidewalk, crosswalk, and crosswalk lighting deficiencies in Nanaimo that could benefit from this fund. And the question being, rather than relying on complaint-driven algorithmic matrix spreadsheets that appear to have been inadequate since amalgamation, will the city move forward and commit the pedestrian transportation fund and any other additional funds to a transparent, proactive plan to address specifically pedestrian deficiencies?
Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Your Worship. I know this is a hot topic, but we are undergoing our active transportation master plan, which is a companion document to the transportation master plan. And staff, if I get this wrong, please correct me. I think I speak for council on any of these answers tonight. But from that, it will be developing a much more robust, in that plan, they'll be developing a much more robust methodology for how we do these improvements and where we do them, and the factors and inputs that lead into that. With respect to funding, you know, that $300,000 is quite a small amount. We've discussed how much this infrastructure costs, and that doesn't get you very much. And if we are serious about active transportation, we need to fund it better. With that said, in the last 5 years, I believe there was $24 million, and it's not easily captured, but it's road renewal projects and things like that, and dedicated funding for particular projects. In the next 5 years, it's $77 million, so we should see overall, the city should see much more active transportation infrastructure, including sidewalks. And then finally, I know we will be having a future session, I'm not sure if it's council meeting or a governance priorities committee meeting, where we will be discussing some of these intersections that are problematic, or that they've had issues, and in the terrible scenarios where there's been tragic injury or deaths, that where we can best apply our resources, maybe increase our resources by finding additional funds to improve that infrastructure that, you know, I think a lot of people, rightfully so, label as inadequate. So a lot of it is undoing past development patterns, but that's no excuse to make the effort to improve it.
Councillor Thorpe.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you, I don't think I can answer better than Councillor Brown did, but I appreciate the question, and I also noted one part of your question or opening statement stated that our response should not be complaint-driven, and you know I agree with that. And I think it goes to the fact that we do have a long-term strategy in this city for improving our transportation infrastructure, whether it be for sidewalks or cycle paths or vehicle traffic. And I think we need to give our staff credit for having that vision. And again, because of the layout of the city, it's very, very challenging, and we can't fix everything all at once. But there is a long-term plan. Projects have been identified, and often staff try to piggyback improvements in a certain area, so that if we are rebuilding a roadway, we can look at sidewalk and cycle paths at the same time. So that's part of the process.
Thank you, Councillor Thorpe. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Roque.
So I'm going to take this question from the website, and it says, Council, could we please get a sidewalk installed and crosswalk improvements in front of Departure Bay Elementary done in the 2020 budget?
Mr. Sims.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm pleased to be here. The staff certainly agrees that this particular area is a priority. In fact, did a study in 2018. It's currently funded in the plan for 2022. And staff are actually looking at it right now to see if there's some interim work that we can do to improve this little stretch of road.
Thanks very much. Ms. Roque.
I'm going to take a question from the audience. Mr. Manners, if you'd like to head to the podium.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor and Council. Bill Manners from Nanaimo. I'm just going to keep it on the sidewalk topic for a moment, and I'll come back later for other questions. It's stated in the documents that I received regarding the budget that the city did 11 kilometers of sidewalk. I believe that was 2018. And my question is that 11 kilometers developer done part of development, or was that done directly by the city? And if so, how much was done by the city?
Mr. Sims.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm not sure of the exact amount that the city may have done, but I believe the 11 kilometers would have included that contributed by development to the sidewalk network. But we can certainly address that question. Thank you.
Just to follow up to that question, the reason why I'm asking is because $300,000 is in the budget per year for sidewalks. Is there any additional money from anywhere else put into that $300,000? Thank you.
Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Your Worship. The $300,000 is earmarked for a specific project that comes up that needs funding. The city already has in its 5-year and 10-year plans sidewalk development, road development, and it's all in there. This particular $300,000 isn't what we're going to be spending on sidewalks next year. It's going to be typically what's happened in the past is staff will come to council with a project, and it needs a top-up to add on the active infrastructure, like we did on Halliburton. An opportunity came up, and so we used the money for that. And prior to that, it was used for development of sidewalks in the hospital area. So it's not all the money we're going to spend on sidewalks by any way, shape, or form. It's just there in case an opportunity comes up to add on to something that's happening.
Councillor Brown.
Just to quickly add, I believe in the next year's budget, it's about 1.8 million for sidewalks and 6.6 for the next 5 years. So that 300,000, as Councillor Bonner indicated, isn't that's sort of discretionary funds, but there is other sidewalks included in capital projects.
Ms. Roque.
Okay, I'm going to take a question from the digital realm, and the question is, when will something finally happen to take the waterfront walkway from being a series of unconnected stretches to an actual continuous corridor?
Mr. Lindsay's coming forward. Hopefully he'll be less verbose than the mayor would be if he answered the question.
Thank you, Your Worship. I think there's a couple things I'd add or respond to with that question. And one is, if someone's saying a series of disconnected portions of the walkway, I have to assume they're talking about the Newcastle Channel portion. They're not saying it in that question, but I assume that's where they're talking about. I think most people, first of all, most people in Nanaimo may not know that once you leave, if you're walking north on the Waterfront Walkway, and once you essentially get past the Nanaimo Yacht Club, you're primarily into area that's all filled foreshore, and it's under the lease of either the province or the feds. Certainly a good part of the feds, and it's managed by the Nanaimo Port Authority. So the majority of the walkway portions that you see along there have been secured by what is now the Nanaimo Port Authority at the time that those leases have come up or been renewed for those property owners, and that is still their goal is as the leases turn over or new leases come in or the sites are developed, that those chunks will be developed. I agree with the comment because I think it's frustrating. There's only about 3 little pieces left there along there that would allow that to be filled in. But it's not an area like the others where the city has complete jurisdiction. We have to work with our partner, the Port Authority, in order to get those sections done.
Thank you very much, Councillor Thorpe.
Thank you, Your Worship. Very briefly, I'll respond to this as well because the waterfront walkway is important to me, as I think it is to the majority of council, and I know to many of our citizens, and we want to see it completed and completed in as timely a manner as possible. But that said, it's a multi-million-dollar project, and quite frankly, our city has other priorities that we have to look at as well. So I think what we're trying to do is complete sections of the waterfront walkway as budget constraints allow, take the quick wins when we can get them, and certainly try and sort out some of the challenges for the other sections as we're doing that. But in the long term, I'm confident it will get completed. It's just not going to happen in the next 1 or 2 years. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Farokhi.
I'm going to take another question from the digital realm. Mr. Lindsay, this one's potentially directed to you if His Worship directs it back to you. Most cities bring in significant revenues from bylaw enforcement fines, but Nanaimo brings in almost nothing year after year. When will this council commit to increasing bylaw revenues so they can fund at least part of the $2 million bylaw budget out of revenues instead of raising taxes? Thank you.
Mr. Lindsay.
Thank you, Worship. Maybe to start with, just the person who sent the question is correct. It's a little bit more than what they have noted there in terms of the operating budget for bylaw. It's about $2.9 million in 2019. Our budgeted revenues for 2019 are just over $2 million. And when we were checking just today to see year to date, we actually have exceeded those revenues. So we're just over $2 million in revenues. In terms of the comment about comparing to other communities, I think you have to be really careful when you start talking about comparison of revenues from individual departments to other communities, because this question's come up a number of months ago, and we did some work around this, looking at how do we actually sit compared to many of our comparable communities. And when I talk about $2 million in revenue, for example, that's coming into Nanaimo, I'm talking about revenue that's coming largely from parking, but also coming from animal control and bylaw enforcement. When you look at numbers that are reported by other municipalities, they may not have parking. They may not have a parking function. They may have a parking function but reported in a different line item or different section. So it's very difficult just on the surface without digging into each municipality's budget to do comparisons. What I would say is of the comparable municipalities we looked at, our projected revenues for 2019 were the highest. And those were comparable communities of Kamloops and Kelowna and a couple others that we would normally look at in our size. But again, to be fair to those municipalities, every municipality reports and accounts for their revenues differently. So it's often apples and oranges.
Thanks very much. Ms. Farokhi.
Anyone from the audience like to ask a question? Please come on up.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Les Barkley, Nanaimo. I have a suggestion and a question. This was prompted by two things that were said today. One was the mayor's point that maybe you'll get ideas how to save money from the public, and another was as a result of the motion today to hire a deputy city clerk. So, in one of the reports from the many budget meetings you've had over the last 2 or 3 weeks, one of them was from Legislative Services and Communications, and it noted as achievements that up until August of this year, there were 32 council meetings and 26 in camera, otherwise known as closed meetings. And it concerns me, these closed meetings cost council, cost you your time, cost the government, the city government, time for staff. Down in Victoria, the city council there has thrown out the idea of doubling their pay because they're working so hard. And I know you as council work very long hours to all these meetings. I was also brought to mind the unscientific but pretty accurate law, Parkinson's law, that work expands to fill the time available. And I think that is true in large respect to government. So my question, has anyone costed all of these closed meetings that occur?
I doubt very much we can give you an exact cost on the cost of closed meetings, but what I can tell you is that the closed meetings can vary in length in terms of time, and staff participation is required dependent on the nature of the closed meetings, and we often receive reports and delegations around sensitive issues that are clearly covered by the in-camera rules that relate to council. So with respect, whether it's in camera or a public meeting, the cost, I suspect, is probably not substantially different, and I'm looking to senior staff if anyone wishes to disabuse me of that notion.
Well, Your Worship, the closed meetings typically are held here. They're not very long compared to GPCs and council meetings themselves, so there would be a rental for the hall that we're paying for the use of the building. And, you know, they're populated by exempt staff, so there's no overtime assigned to this. It's all part of the job description and that type of thing, and it's just so it's a time investment. The largest cost is in the time, and the time to prepare those agendas. So it is part of primarily the exempt team that are attending those meetings, and a bigger group of people obviously supporting that in leading up to those meetings.
So that was my question. My suggestion is if you're looking to keep tax increases to a minimum, look at efficiencies in terms of meetings. More administrators equal more meetings. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hemmons.
Thank you. Mr. Barclay, the undertone of the question that you asked, I just want to share that I personally have been surprised with how often we meet as a council, and I can personally attest that I have not attended a meeting that I did not think I should be at. And I think a lot of this first year of our term has been, 7 out of 9 of us are new, and we're running a $200 million corporation. So there is a lot of getting up to speed, and staff have been amazing in getting us there, and I think we have indeed worked hard, and I would anticipate after this point, probably in the new year, it's going to start to taper. That would be my expectation.
Ms. Faruqi.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm going to take this question from Twitter, which says, with an IAFF contract being negotiated, is any projected increases in the budget? And if not, where will the money come from?
Councillor Armstrong is anxious to get her moment here.
I do know that staff do take that into consideration when they're looking at the budgets, because they look at how the other communities have settled. I'm sure Ms. Mercer can attest to that, because we know IAF will settle with whatever the neighboring do. Like, it's just, otherwise the arbitrators will do it for us.
Good. Ms. Faruqi.
Do we have another question from the audience? Please, come on up.
Please come forward.
Just making sure I wasn't butting in line. I'm Darcy Ambler, and I'm from Nanaimo. Another question about sidewalks. For 2020, I think Councillor Brown alluded to this, there's $1,796,000 is shown under new and upgrades section for pedestrian amenities. Could you please provide a breakdown of what the $1.8 million will be spent on, and what system is used to prioritize the expenditures for pedestrian amenities?
That, I suspect, as to specifics, might be a somewhat difficult question just to answer out of the air with just staff present tonight without
Thank
And
you,
any
Worship.
questions that are asked, we will respond at a future time. Mr. Sims.
Yeah, I apologize for interrupting. $1.8 million, we expect a big part of that will be towards the Metro Drive, but a lot of it is going to other projects. I don't have those off the top of my head. We can address that in the digital answers, and it would be the same. Each of these projects are prioritized, typically how we would prioritize any of them. They're based on traffic speeds, volume, demand, that sort of thing. There's a number of factors that enter into how we prioritize them.
By demand, is that complaints or, sorry?
Sorry, if you could speak into the mic, it's better for everyone. We
By
can hear you.
demand, is that complaints or is it?
Your Worship, Councillor Bonner, we've referred to the $300,000 council discretionary fund. So that is one example where complaints from the public may be brought forward to council, usually in a staff report. We're well aware of many of the areas of complaint that members of the public would have, but we bring those forward, or the intention would be to bring those forward in considering how that fund is spent, that $300,000. But that does not necessarily drive the prioritization of projects, capital projects, no.
Thank you, Ms. Ambler. Councillor Brown?
Thank you, Worship. And again, Mr. Sims, if I'm getting information incorrect here, please do correct me. But we are going through this active transportation master planning process where we do want to hear input from the community on items, and part of that planning process will be ensuring that our methodology to respond to the changing context of our streets and how we view them when we have instances where we get demands for improvements that or we can identify them better and make sure that we're delivering improvements in our capital planning that the community wants and appreciates and can more benefit from.
Ms. Ferroki.
Thank you. Mr. Taylor would like to ask a question.
Fred Taylor of Nanaimo. How much surplus was last year?
Ms. Mercer, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. Trying to remember off the top of my head, but I believe it was somewhere around 2.5 million for general. But I would have to look that up to be exact.
That is quite a bit of money to overcharge the citizen. Can it not be put in a general revenue to reduce taxes? Your 5% or whatever.
For those of you who couldn't hear it, the import of Mr. Taylor's question is, couldn't those funds be used to reduce taxes? And in response, I would simply say, as Mr. Taylor and many of you are well aware, by law, the city, any municipal government, has to balance its budget. And so it's always a fine line when you're talking about $200 million worth of expenditures, how close you can come. That's a 1% variation. And those funds are added, Ms. Mercer, to next year's budget and come in as income, correct?
Yes, the surplus, it goes into a fund where we can use those to fund expenditures or projects in future years.
My opinion is it overcharged to the taxpayer, and all years were involved paying too much. You want a refund, give it back.
Thank you, Mr. Taylor. Appreciate your suggestion. Ms. Ferroki, next question, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. The next question comes from the website, since salaries and benefits are major expenses for the city, are bonuses paid to staff and or management? And if yes, what is the system used to determine the amount of bonuses and who should receive them?
Thank you very much. I think I can safely answer that one. No bonuses are paid to staff. And interestingly, I had a comment in an email a few weeks ago that this person indicated they believed city staff were paid by mile for what they did. So let me just disabuse the public of that notion as well. So there's no bonuses. There's only coal in the stockings at City Hall for this Christmas. Ms. Farokhi.
Next question, again, it comes through the website, and it asks, what are the city's plans for further staffing and funding to the RCMP to keep crime off our streets and keep our families, homes, businesses, and possessions safe?
Councillor Martman, everybody should have a turn.
I know that we've hired 15 RCMP over the next 5 years. We're also looking at increasing our bylaw officers that help keep our parking and our streets safer. And we will continue to work on public safety, and we will have more discussions about that at the GPC.
Good answer, but Councillor Bonner wants to add something.
Oh, it's a great answer, and what I would like to add to that is as our RCMP superintendent has said, we can't arrest ourselves out of this problem. So our streets will become safer when we can provide housing and health care to the people that need it in our community, and that should be our priority. The idea would be is we could make Nanaimo the safe place and put the RCMP out of a job would be fabulous. Thanks.
Reminding everyone, lest they have some misapprehension, that we pay for the police services, but we do not deliver, pay for, operate, or manage public housing. We do not operate the prisons. We do not operate the court system, lest anyone think, with great respect, Councillor Bonner is suggesting we have control over those things, but it is the topic on everyone's lips in this community, and I acknowledge that. Ms. Farokhi.
Thank you, Worship. This question comes from Twitter. It asks, Council has decided to fund a $31,000 grant to the VI Symphony from infrastructure reserves, but a grant increase to the Nanaimo Area Land Trust is to come from general revenues. How is the VI Symphony considered infrastructure?
Councillor Brown.
Sure, it's a great question, one that Council discussed at Finance and Audit, and around how have items traditionally became and funding initiatives become line items in the budget, how are one-offs funded and one-off requests from Council. And so our understanding, Council's understanding through that conversation was staff will be bringing forward in the future, sometime in the new year, possible policy considerations for Council to better analyze how these items are developed into our budget, how they're paid for, and how there's some consistency in funding different initiatives.
Thank you. Ms. Farokhi.
I'm going to take a question from the audience if anyone has one. No? Mr. Manners, please.
Good evening again. I was hoping someone else would jump in. So my question is regarding the 2020-2024 proposed operating budget for bylaw services and parking. It's obvious that parking services cover their costs. Their revenue generated is more than what they put out for expenses. However, bylaws, we, as a community and as a council, you have developed new bylaws over the last year and a half that direct bylaws to do more enforcement towards the homeless. We know that bylaws, and I applaud everybody that works for bylaws and the work that they do dealing with those people. They do a good job. But why is that a role that the city has taken on? In the words of our CAO, Mr. Rudolph, considering 2019 as a foundation year for the city, the expectations for 2020 are much higher. So I want to know from council, my question is, when are we going to start enforcing equally the bylaws that we have in our city that are complaint-driven?
Thank you, Mr. Manners, and I think I can jump in and state what is fairly obvious and known to people. Supreme Court decisions have basically told us you can camp in certain parks overnight in the city, and in order to clear those parks every morning, it is taking a substantial amount of bylaw enforcement time, that one aspect alone, let alone investigations that may not result in a fine or infraction that may settle neighborhood disputes, as they often are around bylaw issues, as we've come to learn as members of council. I'd be happy to have anyone add further to that, though. It is an expensive process, and you're quite right. Why are bylaw officers doing it? In a perfect world, they wouldn't be dealing with the numbers of people who suffer from mental health and addiction issues and homelessness issues, but it is Mr. Rudolph informs me today, it is the discussion topic across this country for city managers and people working in his positions. Mr. Rudolph.
That's correct, Your Worship. I was at a meeting last week where all the town and city managers that were at this meeting, this was their number one topic. So it's spread completely across the country, rural, urban, large, small. So it's a conversation that's happening in all kinds of communities now, not just on the West Coast. A large part of what bylaw enforcement is intended to do is mediate and facilitate outcomes that are positive in neighborhood disputes and that type of thing. So the idea is to avoid ticketing. That's a last resort if possible. It's not there to really generate revenues. Only that's an unfortunate consequence if it's not worked out. So it's really truly successful bylaw function will be very good at breaking down and dealing with those problems before they get to a ticketing incident. And the other thing is in dealing with the homeless and some of the problems in our parks and so on, we're spending a lot of time in advance of getting a lot of complaints, because if we weren't in the parks doing as much as we are with our bylaw teams, there would be an awful lot more complaints, I think, received from the members of the general public. So it's a proactive initiative.
Thank you, Mr. Rudolph. Ms. Froking.
The graphs on page 20 of the 2020 to 2024 draft financial plan show the breakdown of planned investment in the next 5 years by category, with the largest percentages investing in transportation, water, and parks. Why is the city making such a large investment in these categories?
Well, Mr. Sims, we'll let you take a run at it, but somebody else may wish to comment as well. They are pretty essential functions the last time I checked, but...
Worship, thank you. I'd be happy to hear any member of council. I'm sure you could all speak eloquently on this subject. Quite frankly, I'm pleased that the question used the word investment, because really that's what it is. This is an investment in not only the present day, but in the future of our community. It's looking after the infrastructure that our citizens rely on day in and day out. We all wake up and have a shower or have a bath or use our roads or use our parks and not consider where the funding comes from, but we each pay for that. So it's really an investment in our future, and those pieces of infrastructure comprise about $3 billion in value, and to keep those maintained, we need to keep the investment up. So it's an excellent question.
An investment in our future and also a necessary expenditure in maintaining our past. In other words, the relics that operate as city sewers and water mains, etc., across this community. Councillor Turley.
Thank you, Worship. In response to that question, I think the last thing we want to end up being in a situation of is similar to Montreal area, where they've actually had bridges collapsing because of their lack of attention to infrastructure. So I really believe that our staff are right on top of this, and we won't be seeing the same amount of deterioration that some other cities that have ignored it have experienced.
I think it's important to note that 1% annually as part of the tax increase is toward asset management. This city, as I've said before during the course of the debates, around preparing the budget, has taken a very conservative and I think the correct approach to ensuring that we don't run into any occasion where we don't have the money, so to speak, where we're stuck with extraordinary problems. It's a good, conservative, solid approach, and it's one that I'm perfectly happy to defend as mayor. Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Worship. I think you raise an excellent point, and that 1% only exists because assets weren't properly allocated and or properly assessed and their end of life calculated so they could be paid for in appropriate fashion. And as a result, there's a gap there that was identified through the work staff did and previous councils did, and it has to be paid for if we want to maintain this level of infrastructure. That's not even talking about new infrastructure. So the reality is there's a little bit of Ponzi scheme in terms of growth, and then at some point you have to pay that. And we're seeing that conversation just not in Nanaimo, but in cities across North America.
Ms. Ferroki.
Well, I've just been informed that Nanaimo Beacon had submitted a question, so it should be coming up shortly. So stay tuned for that. But in the meantime, here's a question from the website. The 2020 Business Plan for Community Development states implementation of the new economic development function stipulates staff will be tasked with increasing capacity in-house. How much will this change in the economic development function cost?
Mr. Lindsay? And there's also the issue around explaining tourism and the work of that as well in terms of budgetary item that used to be done in-house.
So without talking to tourism, Your Worship, I think just on the economic development function, so to be clear, throughout 2019, Council's done a review of the economic development program. And through that work has made some decisions, including adding internally a new manager of economic development in 2020, and then adding some amount of funds, I think $400,000 is the number, it's in my head, for seed money to start a new external organization, sorry, 300,000, I'm being corrected, to start work with an external organization for economic development. And a task force has been established, and the members, I believe earlier this evening already, the mayor has announced the membership to that committee, and I think that work gets underway this week to help guide us through. So 2020 will be very much a year of having it reviewed by the task force, having a new plan put in place, and then fully implemented in 2021.
Thank you. Ms. Ferroki.
Just going to check in with our audience to see if anyone has a question. Go ahead.
I have two quick questions arising from answers that Council gave tonight. The first is Councillor Brown. So the question is, will your decision to fund the VI Symphony from the Strategic Infrastructure Reserve Fund therefore result in more meeting time by Council and more meeting time by staff spent on this issue? Yes or no?
There was no more time. That was part of our budget deliberations.
Okay, but his answer to the Twitter question before was that Council will consider this and bring this back, or staff will consider this and bring this back to Council, which sounds like a lot of time.
I can answer that. We have so many different funding sources, and we're picking and choosing all the time, so we've asked for a policy review as to where things should come from. So instead of somebody comes up with, this week saying, well, we're looking for this, well, where are we going to find the money from? So we want direct policies so that we know that when these last minutes come, where they come from. I don't know if you're aware, but today there was a vote to abolish the Councillor Contingency Fund, which saves 0.1% in taxes. So that's, we used to use that for some stuff. So we want a report, so that's what it was, to streamline our business processes.
So policy review on this.
I guess that would be correct, yeah.
Okay.
And your second question?
And my second question, I've been going through the SOFI reports, trying to look at increases in remuneration. And it's puzzling to see, to understand that. But it was good that you made it clear that non-union staff are not paid bonuses, so that takes that out of the equation. But my question is, are non-union staff in the city paid overtime?
Ms. Mercer?
No.
Let's see you reaching for your...
non-union staff, is that what your question is?
Yes, yeah.
Staff.
Exempt
Yes.
staff, there are some ability to bank some overtime, but the vast majority is not paid for.
Okay, yeah. The reason is because between 2017 and 2018, the remuneration for certain staff went up considerably, and I'm trying to understand that.
Oh, I can answer that.
Yeah.
Councillor Armstrong.
I can answer that. When we were looking at where we were sitting as a city, and I'm sure you're aware that we were struggling to fill some positions, so we started looking at where do we sit in comparison to other municipalities, and we were behind. So that was one of the reasons. We increased the staff to bring us up to levels, not even quite the same as others still, but getting up there. And in order, when we did that, that also increased the responsibility of certain areas, so we went to general managers and a new general manager of corporate services, I believe, which will oversee where, that was kind of a gap where everything was left to Mr. Rudolph, and he just doesn't have the time of the day to deal with almost 1,200 employees.
So job descriptions changed and therefore the
Correct,
pay scale.
yes.
Oh, okay, I understand. Thank you.
Yeah, reorganization.
Sure, okay.
Thank you. Ms. Faroki.
This next question comes from some residents from Protection Island. So they're asking, Protection Islanders appreciate your commitment to rebuilding the Gallows Point dock and boat launch. And they'd like to know whether the city has budgeted for their share of the work to be completed in 2020.
Mr. Harding.
Phase 2 of the Beacon House project. We work with the Lions, Protection Lions and other community members. So the city portion of $68,650 is in the 2020 budget. And then those groups are out working and finding their share.
Thank you very much, Mr. Harding. Ms. Faroki.
This is a fun one. Why does council seem to be so willing to accept such a large tax increase rather than deferring some of the wish list items in the budget when we are already facing huge affordability issues here in Nanaimo?
I think I can safely answer that, and we'll look to other members of council if they wish. One of the reality is that when you make those decisions, they have longer-term consequences. This council, I think, is being much more transparent, forthright, and upfront in considering tax increases that may be politically unpalatable, but are preferable to deferring the decision, leaving it in the lap of some other future council to have to deal with the fact that we didn't have the political courage to do what is necessary in the present time. Anyone wish to add to that? Councillor Armstrong. Yep, sorry, Councillor Thorpe got there first.
I think I just nipped in ahead of Councillor
Very quick.
Armstrong. Thank you, Your Worship, and it's hard to add to what you just said, but I totally agree. And I would point out that deferring things to future years just compounds the problem down the road. And I think this council has looked at this budget with a conservative eye, hoping to keep taxes as low as possible, because, as I said a year ago, nobody likes to pay taxes, but we all expect the services and facilities that our city provides. And I think when we looked at the budget drivers in the budget documents that we examined, most of council came to consensus that these were all worthwhile, important areas that we needed to fund, looking to save money where we could, in some cases drawing funds from as Councillor Bonner, I think it was earlier, said, the Infrastructure Reserve Fund or council contingency, looking to avoid a further burden on the taxpayers. But these are all areas that we felt needed to be dealt with this year, and hopefully by doing that we won't have the same set of demands on us next year. No promises, but I think it would be a mistake just to push things off to next year and, as I said, compound the problem. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Councillor Thorpe. Ms. Faroki.
This next question is from the website. It says, why is council prioritizing cycling lanes to such a large degree over pedestrian infrastructure that serves people of all ages and abilities?
Mr. Sims.
Thank you, Your Worship. In fact, I would say that cycling is not necessarily prioritized over pedestrians. I'm sorry, I just don't have any better answer than that. I think our investment in pedestrian facilities is at least as or greater than cycling infrastructure. As you've intimated earlier, some of the transportation projects that we do include, we add on or we expand our cycling or pedestrian network where possible. but often our focus is pedestrians first.
I think I could respond also by bringing up the Halliburton Street project, which was a piggyback on RDN necessary sewage works, that it did require that the existing sidewalk be torn up. And council, well, I won't say council, city staff very wisely recognized the opportunity in not just to replace the sidewalk, which is good for pedestrians, obviously, stating the obvious, but also to allow for a cycling lane as well, and on a road that is not nearly as busily traveled as the Island Highway itself. So there's an example. Now, I don't think it's fair to say that the cycling lane was taking priority over the sidewalk in that case, but it was a timely confluence of events that allowed us to move forward with both projects. Ms. Farokhi, I'm going to suggest we've got 4 minutes, so let's try and take another couple more.
Okay. We have a question from the audience for you.
Questioner, I'll happily take an original questioner. Because, and with respect to other members of the audience, if you've asked 2 questions already and we have someone online, I think we have to give them credit first. Good evening, Mrs. Taylor.
Good evening. My question is regarding an item that's on the agenda tonight, but it would fall, if it's passed, it would fall, in my opinion, to the 2020-24 budget. So my question would be through you, Mayor Krogh, to Councillor Hemmons, if your proposal for the reimbursement for councillors for childminding and committee members was passed, do you not feel that there would be a ripple effect? And as you stated in the media, news media, it would be minuscule amount. To me, anybody, any city employee, in my opinion, would be entitled to have child-minding services also. Otherwise, is that not discrimination? To me, that would bring your budget up. I don't think you can discriminate between one group and another. If it's good for one, it's good for another. And if you have city employees, which they're entitled to, in my opinion, that will increase the budget.
It's a bit wide on the budget, but Councillor Hemmons indicates she wishes to answer, so
Thank you,
please
Your
do.
Worship, and thank you for the question. So the budget isn't finalized. It won't be finalized until May, and up until that point, council can make additions, take things off. You know, it's an evolving process. So as to whether it will impact the budget, that remains to be seen. Tonight's motion is really about asking for a staff report. It's not about saying, yes, we're going to pay for childcare for committee members or for city councillors or for city staff. It's asking for a report from staff to explore the idea of reimbursing people who come to committees either as volunteers or as city councillors.
Yes, I understand that. But if that report is approved, that would have effect on the budget because anybody would be entitled to an increase or have child-minding services. Any staff member could or would be entitled to that if you're allowing it for volunteers and council members. Otherwise, it is not fair. And I know it's a staff report coming forward, but if that staff report is approved by council, that will have implications.
Worship, could we maybe have this, we're
Yes.
having this discussion, perhaps this is
Yes,
no offense, but I think it's putting Councillor Hemmons on the
Yes,
spot
and-
when we even haven't had the chance to discuss it. I think it is coming up, and I think that's the time to have it. That discussion, because I think there's lots of comments that will be made from other councillors as well around that, so I think, no offense, I do understand your concerns, I share some of your concerns, but those will be discussed when we get to that item on the agenda.
Okay.
Fair? Thank you.
Nothing's a done deal until motions are passed.
Your Worship, just to make a note that we actually started the E-Town Hall 10 after 7, so we've got about 10 minutes. We've got a few more questions that's okay with you. What are the plans to increase the number of emergency shelter beds in Nanaimo?
Mr. Lindsay, looks like you want to answer that one.
Sorry, Worship, thank you. The first part of that answer would be to clarify that generally, if we're talking about overnight emergency shelter beds, it's the responsibility of the province through BC Housing who primarily pays for those. However, over the last number of years, the City of Nanaimo had been contributing with Unitarian shelter and paying for non-cold weather nights. That changed in 2018, 2019 with BC Housing took over paying for every night of that operation of Unitarian shelter. The city did provide some funds through this last year to allow for expansion of hours so that the persons coming to the shelter would have access to resources and services before and after. I'd also mention, in addition to Unitarian, that the shelter at St. Peter's just opened, I believe it was just this past week. There's 35 beds or mats in that facility, and this is the second year that it's been operating, and that project is also funded through BC Housing.
Ms. Farokhi.
Got another question regarding tax increases. This is what is being done to help citizens who can't afford the tax increase? And this question comes from Facebook.
There is no direct program that provides relief to people who cannot pay their property taxes, save and except that if you're a senior, you're entitled under British Columbia law to defer those taxes, and you pay a very nominal rate of interest on that deferral. And indeed, I can say as a lawyer, I had wealthier clients over the years who happily deferred their substantial property tax bills, used the money to invest and make money in turn, and used the province as a cheap bank. But there is no specific program to give people relief from their taxes. We're required by law to levy them, and we're required to collect them.
This next question comes from Twitter.
Going to say, maybe we could let Mr. Boland have a question.
Mr. Boland, please, go ahead.
My question deals with the way in which data is presented to the public, and I suspect to yourselves, the reports that we get, there is extensive data available over the years by budgets, by you name it. However, the data in them is hidden in PDF format. Any tables that you want to examine or compare, it is very difficult, as far as I know, to convert those into an Excel worksheet or something which can be analyzed. I don't know if any of you counselors use some method of analysis of the data that is available, because to me data is the question of the day, and particularly when it comes to budgets. Is there a way for the city to make that data available in a format that's easily transferable into an Excel or other worksheet format?
That's a very good question, Mr. Boland, and of course no one at this table expects me to answer that question. So I'll turn to Ms. Mercer.
Thank you, Your Worship. The data that is pulled into these reports are very, very large and very complicated. We issue them as PDFs because if that information goes out and is manipulated in a way that we cannot corroborate or back up, then that information can be skewed to view whatever point you're trying to make. We can look and see what kind of information can be available, but for the most part, the massive database that comes behind those is not something that we would.
Well, I'm not looking at the total database. I'm just looking at whenever I see a table of any kind, that table be available. It's not asking you for information that you're not already providing. It's only asking for that data in a format that is easy to work with, because trying to look at a couple of comparative documents and trying to fill them out, and, it just doesn't work. And there's just no time available for that. So if there isn't, and no one knows of such a thing, I gather either you're not comparing that data, or anyway, I won't follow that up. But,
Councillor Hemmons has a response.
Well, actually, a question back. Non-budgetary, can you give an example of a table that you'd like the data on?
I'm sorry.
Sorry, Ron. Can you give an example that's not related to the budget of a table that you...
Well, if I go in, for example, let's just say I'm going into one of the budgets of one of the departments, and there's a table there that shows that data.
Okay.
I may want to compare that to what it was last year. And yet, if I get it, it all comes out in a string of data, not in a table form. Even though I can see it as a table, but when I try to copy it and get it, it's PDF, and PDF is not a formatted state. It's a unformatted format. And the table, visually, it's formatted, but only visually. As data, it's not, and can't be easily used for a comparison. So it's a visual format rather than a data format, even though it's working with data. I hope I've made myself clear.
You haven't. So every budget that we review, we have last year's budget with it. So I don't manipulate on a spreadsheet, I simply look and see what happened last year. So it's just a visual comparison.
Well,
Not,
unless you're changing your data format every year, some changes will happen for sure, but a lot of them won't. And I just don't understand quite why, and I understand the city, in working with that data, couldn't work with it if they kept it in that format for their use. It's when they distribute it that it gets into that PDF format, because they couldn't work with it internally that way and produce that
Councillor
table.
Bonner has a response, and
Yeah, thank you. And I asked the question when you presented to me, Ron, regarding that. And staff said at the time, no, they only sent them out as PDF. And I'm going to agree with that. And here's the reason why. Is from my background in what I do for a living, I know that PDF documents are formatted so that the people reading them can't change them.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to suggest that you're going to do this, but if the data was made out available, we would be seeing documents all over the place with figures that weren't actually that staff had given out.
Oh, well, if you're figuring your citizens are going to be liars or cheats, well,
And
I don't know what you want
and it's
to
not
say
even
with
it's
that.
not even a question of,
But my
being,
question is, yes,
Yeah.
I quite agree with you.
Mhm.
That table, I could go in and change one of those figures. I could also white it out and put in something else and then start producing it all over the place the same way. So, it's not stopping that kind of activity to have it.
I think we have your
paper.
point, Mr. Bolin, and I'm going to try and get one more question in before the hour's up. As much as I, of all people, really appreciate a dissertation about the inner workings of the world in which I try not to play too often.
Well, you need to understand, if you don't understand the inner workings, you don't understand what's going on. Anyway, okay.
My quill pen is still working. Ms. Faroki.
This question comes from Twitter. Nanaimo is growing rapidly, and many businesses are experiencing long wait times for various permits from the city. How will council address this issue with the current budget?
Well, I think Mr. Lindsay might want to jump up and respond to this, but let me put it in simply graphic terms. We will probably break building permits this year of $400 million with the same staff that last year worked diligently to produce $216 million in building permits, not dissimilar to the staff that some years ago managed to pump out $52 million, our best year prior, Mr. Lindsay? The reality is this community is enjoying, I use the term enjoying, others may say suffering, but I say enjoying a tremendous building boom that results in incredible pressure on staff at a time when it is almost impossible to find and hire people who are competent to do the work that is necessary. This is not something you can pull someone off the street to do. Mr. Lindsay, feel free to add to my brief mutterings.
Your Worship, and I was going to pick up on that thread of the difficulty of finding people, because I would certainly say when we've come forward to council and identified a need, council's responded. We did that late in the budget cycle last year, where we identified a need for an engineering technician. So it's not always positions in our building department per se that result in slowdowns in our approvals. And at that time, we identified the engineering section as requiring additional supports. Council provided that support. That position was for July 1st, and here we are December 1st, and we're still not able yet to fill that position. So it's a very competitive market, working very hard to try to do that, but I would just say council's been very supportive when we've requested additional resources.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lindsay. Ms. Froki, I think it's time to wrap up.
Okay, well, I want to take a moment to thank the audience members for coming out and stepping up and asking your questions. And for those of you online, thank you very much for tuning in and submitting your questions. We will do our best to get back to you on the remaining questions, because I do have about 5 or 10 left, between 5 and 10 left. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you everyone in the audience tonight who participated, whether at home or electronically. The next item is a motion for adoption of the consent items as in the agenda, and we'll get to the other two as separate items. May I have a mover?
So moved.
Councillor Thorpe, seconded Councillor Hemmons. All those in, any discussion? No, I trust not. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much. And Ms. Gurry, if you could confirm what the separate items are, and we'll vote on them separately.
Yes, I can, Your Worship. So the second two items were motions approved by the Finance and Audit Committee earlier today. And the first one, and so you can move these two together and vote on them together. The first one was that Council increase the bylaw enforcement officer's schedule from 35 hours to 40 hours per week, and that the increase be partially funded from parking revenues and the rest be funded from taxation. The second one is that Council remove the Council contingency fund from the 2020 draft budget, that the emergency medical responder training be funded from the Strategic Infrastructure Reserve in 2020, and that the Deputy City Clerk position be added to the draft budget.
Do I have a mover? Moved Councillor Hemmons, seconded Councillor Martman. All those in, Councillor Turley? Yes.
You can just vote on them seriatim then, Your Worship. So,
Seriatim, the
yeah,
first one?
First one, yeah.
Any discussion on the first? All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. And the second one, Councillor Turley? Well, actually, we have, they're both moved, so we're okay.
They've both
Yes,
been moved and
yes.
seconded, so yes, now you can just.
Very good. Anyone else? All those in favor? Opposed? Councillor Turley? Motion carries. Thank you very much. In accordance with the amendment made earlier, we will now move to item 13. Pardon me, yes, sorry, I'm jumping ahead. Delegations, yes. Item 13 being the second part of the delegations, it's Deborah Fraz. And it's re-noise pollution from the Nanaimo Bar, located at 275 Front Street. Please come down to the podium and introduce yourself. Thank you. And this isn't 5 minutes, is it?
Deborah Fraze, resident of 38 Front Street, the Pacifica. I'm here tonight to discuss the ongoing loud music and noisy patrons from the Nanaimo Bar, located directly across the street from a residential building, the Pacifica. For years, residents of the Pacifica have complained about the loud music and the loud patrons. For years, we've had no action. The mayor, city council, bylaws, and the RCMP have done nothing. They hear it, they do nothing. I'm talking numerous complaints over numerous years. None of the departments seem to communicate or share complaints. I've personally put up with this since May of 2018. I'm done. Owner Sonia Coleman signed a good neighbor agreement. It states, noise and disorder. Shall undertake to ensure noise emissions from the establishment do not disturb residential developments, business, and neighborhoods. Shall undertake to monitor and promote orderly conduct of its patrons immediately outside the establishment, particularly those congregating outside during hours as well as closing. To discourage patrons from behavior that may disturb the peace, the quiet, and the enjoyment of the neighborhood. Although the Good Neighbor Agreement was signed, no amount of complaints have led to a fine, a warning, pulling the business license or the liquor license. I myself have submitted numerous complaints to bylaws showing loud music and the patrons of the Nanaimo Bar yelling, talking loudly, swearing, arguing, singing, yodeling, etc. The owner of the Nanaimo Bar wants to keep her doors open. Step 1 to rectify. Keep the doors shut. We don't want to listen to your music. At no time has anyone from the Nanaimo Bar gone out and asked the patrons on the sidewalk or the patio to keep the noise down due to residential across the street. I record all my actions of the Nanaimo Bar because I don't want the ongoing complaints to be a he said, she said issue. Videos do not lie. On November the 9th of 2019, the music from the Nanaimo Bar could be heard in my unit. My doors and windows are closed, my TV's on. I can hear the Nanaimo Bar music and the patrons louder than I can with what's happening in my unit. If I were to message Sonia Coleman, the owner, she would just message back, doors are closed, music's not loud. So instead, on November the 9th, I got dressed. It was approximately 10:50 p.m. I went to the Nanaimo Bar doors. There was loud music, the doors were open, a dozen patrons on the patio and the sidewalk. Music is so loud, the patrons yell at one another just to be heard, and I get to hear it too. The person on the door said the digital reading was within legal limits. I don't care what the digital readout says. I can tell you the noise in my unit is excessive. And once again, I refer you to the Good Neighbor Agreement. I won't repeat all that's in there. I want the doors closed when the music is playing, and only when the doors are closed do I not get to hear that music. Sonia Coleman tells me she's following the Good Neighbor Agreement. If she was, I wouldn't have to go down to her unit and have an argument with her. As a resident of the Pacifica, I don't want to take over the job of the bylaws officer or the RCMP.
Ms. Curry, just to confirm, 5 minutes?
Yep.
And you're at 4.
Okay,
Thank you.
I'm wrapping up. Sleep deprivation is not fun. You become confused, memory loss, trying to sleep through the day, grouchy all the time, no patience. Step 1, keep the door shut. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any questions for the delegation? Thank you. We are now on to the delegations relating to the 2 motions. And I'm wondering, practically speaking, we call the delegations first before the motion and do them separately. So, Gina Stajic and Maeve O'Byrne, Equal Voice, Central Bank Island, related to the first motion, that a report be prepared for council with a draft policy and framework for ensuring gender parity on all city committees and task forces. Good evening.
Good evening. I'd like to begin by acknowledging we're on the traditional territory of the Snuneymuxw First Nation and thank them for the opportunity to be here tonight on their land to present. Thank you to His Worship, Mayor of Nanaimo, and all of Council for having us here today. We're pleased to be here tonight to present on this motion that's being put forward by Councillors Hemmens and Brown. We are here as part of Equal Voice, which is a national, multi-partisan organization that was created in 2001, focused on electing more women into politics at all levels across Canada. My name is Janina Steyich. I am the executive of the Central Vancouver Island chapter, and this is
Mayville Byrne,
who will also be speaking tonight. Ashwa Siri, who is our chair, is unable to be here, but she sends her support for these motions and her regrets that she can't be here as she's out of the country. Equal Voice was created because women are still underrepresented in leadership and political roles, despite having exceptional leadership qualifications and experience. The goal of much of the work we do through Equal Voice is to build a world in which positions and opportunities are awarded or granted based solely on a person's merit and qualifications. But we know, study after study across Canada and around the world has demonstrated that that world does not exist yet. In fact, the opposite has been proven. That in order to have an even playing field where candidates are chosen based solely on merit and qualifications, we first need to work at removing barriers that are impacting women from getting into these positions.
Examples of these barriers include unconscious bias, a topic which I've studied and presented internationally at coach training conferences. Unconscious bias refers to the attitudes or stereotypes that affect our understanding, actions, and decisions in an unconscious manner. Our brains catalog information, we make snap decisions, judgments based on previous experience, media messages, and lessons learned from family. All these are retained to give us blind spots and impact our decisions. We all have biases. Eliminating biases is impossible. Mitigating their impact is not. So, we may think we are awarding positions solely based on qualifications, but instead our unconscious bias is informing our decisions in ways that we don't realize. Example, when hiring for the Australian Symphony, management was finding a lot more men were given positions. They instituted blind auditions and had aspiring musicians play behind a screen. Gender parity was achieved. Others include women need to be asked 7 times before they will consider running for political positions. Men only need to be asked once. This has a lot to do with the fact if you can't see it, you can't be it. Young women are less likely to receive encouragement to run for office, participate in committees, and on boards. Women face significantly higher rates of harassment, bullying, and the understanding of this prevents them from pursuing these roles.
There are other barriers, but we realize we don't have all night. So we just hope that these examples are enough to demonstrate why gender parity policies are necessary. Quite simply, the imbalance that's happening is not just going to resolve itself. There are simply too many barriers facing women at the moment. Fortunately, there are numerous organizations around the world that have recognized why this gender inequity is occurring and proposing solutions to right the imbalance. These solutions include introducing gender parity policies to ensure that qualified, experienced women have a seat and a voice at the table. Here in BC, we have the Minerva Foundation, which encourages organizations to sign the Diversity Pledge to introduce parity policies and procedures into their organizations. And in our own region, one of our biggest employers, VIU, is taking this issue very seriously. They are supporting gender parity on various committees, including hiring committees, and they are formalizing an equity, diversity, and inclusion plan, which will look at ways in which the university can proactively support things such as gender parity on boards and committees.
To conclude, the reasons women are underrepresented in leadership and political roles have nothing to do with their merit or qualifications, but more about the barriers they face. As has been demonstrated, gender parity policy is definitely a model of best practice and one way we can start to ensure people are awarded positions and opportunities based solely on their qualifications. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions to the delegation?
So, Your Worships, before you carry on to the next
Yes, we're going to do the
delegation,
motion.
you do, yes.
Thank you. Councillor Hemmons.
Thank you. I would like to move that a report be prepared for council with a draft policy and framework for ensuring gender parity on all city committees and task forces.
Seconded. Councillor Brown. Councillor Hemmons.
She can speak first.
Thank you. Thank you for that courtesy. So I'd like to thank the members of Equal Voice who presented tonight in support of this motion and the following. I'd also like to thank the Mayor and my fellow councillors for their support in our successful co-application with Equal Voice to the Towards Parity grant through the Federation of Canadian Municipalities. This grant was started in recognition that there are barriers that women face that prevent them from fully participating in municipal politics. What I'm asking my fellow councillors to do with this motion is to be curious. To summarize what we know from peer-reviewed evidence-based literature, women are grossly underrepresented at leadership tables. We've made some gains in the last decades, however, if left to sort itself out, without proactive strategies like the one Councillor Brown and I are proposing, we're looking at the gender parity gap closing in approximately 170 years. Women are underrepresented due to a number of barriers they face broadly as a result of their gender. Interestingly, none of those barriers that women face are a lack of qualifications. Why is it important to have women at the table? Research tells us that women come to the table in a different way than men. Not a better way, but a different way, and that those differences are what will make our decisions more reflective of the broader makeup of our society. This, of course, extends beyond women and into other under or unrepresented groups. Why us? Why should this matter to City Council? We know that much of what keeps women from putting their names forward can't realistically be tackled by the city, but the city does have a powerful role to play in developing policy that identifies the current lack of parity as an issue that deserves our attention. A key point that I think has been missed to this point is that this policy is not meant to favor gender over qualifications. Again, qualifications are not the issue. This policy is meant to address the fact that we have qualified members of our community who are simply not applying. This is a recruitment issue that we could address via policy, and if we're successful, we stand to make better, more representative decisions for our community. Finally, we've been asked if we do this, where do we realistically stop, and how do we ensure the equal participation of all underrepresented groups in our community? I think that's a very worthwhile conversation to have, and I look forward to it. Tonight's decision, however, is about where to start. I ask my fellow civic leaders, and I emphasize the word leaders, to simply express curiosity about this. Express curiosity about the evidence presented tonight, and allow staff to write the report so that we can continue this important conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. Before I go to further debate on the motion itself, Councillor Martman, did I hear you wishing to make a motion to defer?
If I may, can I speak to why I would like to, and why this first motion?
I think you should make your motion to defer, and then you can speak to the reasoning for
Okay,
deferral.
I'll make the motion to defer the motion.
Is there a seconder?
Second.
Seconded, Councillor Armstrong.
Right. Though I have to say I was struggling a little bit with deferring the first motion, because for gender parity, I agree, although some of the wording of it I wouldn't mind amended. But I'm going to speak to the deferral. First of all, I did attend the Towards Parity at the UBCM. And I know that in municipal politics, 33% of municipalities are women, 66.8% are men. That Canada has actually now fallen to the 61st spot when it comes to governance by women. 18% of women are mayors, and only 28% are councillors of women, which tends to be right around the average of where we are as a city, because we have 33% of women are on our committees. Though I would like to say that every committee does have representation from women.
We have over 50% of the population. I believe having women's voices doesn't replace anybody's lens, but adds to it. And at the UBCM, they talked about how municipalities and local governments, we need to own this and we need to lead this. That we need to celebrate accomplishments of women, and we need to be able to make it more engaging so that women are becoming involved, whether it's at the school level, at committee levels, at nonprofit organizations, but we need to be able to attract women into the leadership position and tell them they are welcome and they are not going to be bullied, and that we want the representation of women in our leadership, in our communities. However, this is a very fulsome conversation that needs to happen. And I don't think at this table, at this place, at this time, I would love to defer this to the GPC, where we can have a meaningful conversation, where we could take an hour to have dialogue back and forth of how we see parity represented, of whether it's ensuring or encouraging or welcoming or however we come to achieve it. But I don't see this as a fly-by-night motion. I see this as something very serious where good conversation needs to happen, and some of it needs to be educational and enlightening. But we need to be able to have the time to have that meaningful conversation, and that's why I'm deferring it to the GPC. Thank you.
Thank you. I have a list of speakers, but we're speaking to the deferral. If you wish to speak to the deferral, Ms. Gurry.
Thank you, Worship. Yes, that's correct. And I did receive clarification I was looking for from Councillor Hemmons that it would be deferred to a future GPC committee meeting for discussion. And just further clarification, you want the motion itself that a report be prepared on a draft policy, all of that content be deferred to a future GPC meeting for discussion.
Yes, and if I can speak further to that, I understand that getting a report is a very proactive way to go, but I think a discussion needs to be happening that we can give proper direction to staff of what type of report we would like to see, because this needs to have all of us together with deciding, with collaborating on what the report looks like. And my concern was actually what could happen right now is if we don't defer it, this motion could be voted down, and in that case, conversation will never happen. And so I want to see this move forward, but I don't think we're ready for a report from staff. And the other thing I just want to caution all of us on council is we're very aware of capacity and staff workload. We have so many priorities right now. And although this is a priority in this term, I could see it being perhaps the spring. I just know we have so many other things we're worried about.
Councillor Armstrong, you accept the I won't call it amendments necessarily, but the motion as suggested by Ms. Gurry?
Yes, I want the deferral, and if I could speak to it?
Well, I'm going to go through the list in order as I have it, if you wish to speak to the deferral. Otherwise, we'll knock you off and we'll get to the main and then get to the vote. Councillor Turley, do you wish to speak to the deferral?
No, I just wanted to make a comment that I had to be asked more than once to run.
What? He had to be asked
Councillor
more than once to
Martman.
run. Oh.
Here, we've already heard from you. Councillor Brown on the deferral?
Yeah, thank you, Worship. I will speak to that. I was hoping we would have gone through the list so people could speak to the original motion on the floor. I won't be supporting this deferral, but if that's the route council goes, I understand your position, Councillor Martman, and whether that discussion is at this table or a future GPC table, I think it's just good to be having that conversation. However, I do think as we move forward and as we're developing committees, creating space for those diverse voices for the reasons that you bring up are important, and I think that delay misses out on that opportunity. Today I was actually telling Councillor Councillor Hemmons about a time at this council table where a perspective presented by a female member was so radically different than my experience that it's completely changed how I view the casino. And I think that perspective is important to accommodate, create space for, and have in those discussions at the committee level that ultimately lead to the council table. So no, I won't be supporting the deferral, but I will be happy if it goes to a GPC, and hopefully that would be the second best. And I think I'll just end it with someone I think that's much wiser on this topic than me, and that's the notorious RBG. When she was asked about, I'll just read it quickly. When I'm asked, when will there be enough women on the Supreme Court? And I say, when there are 9. People are shocked. But there'd be 9 men, and nobody's ever raised a question about that. And I would say nobody's ever needed a GPC about that.
Good point.
Councillor Armstrong.
Thank you. The reason I wish to go to the deferral is that we from the UBCM and from municipalities, we asked the FCM to do this report. The report will be done in 2020. It's been 3 years into the making. There's going to be a toolkit for municipal governments to utilize. And I think for us to move on this and ask staff to do all this work when this has already been requested by the FCM, to me is not right. I think we should wait till the FCM report is received, which is due out, I believe, in April of this year, April or May, and look at what that report tells us. I've read numerous reports on this. Everything says the same. We know what the issues are. I don't think we need a report to tell us what the issues are. We all know them. I disagree with something Councillor Brown said. When I look at candidates that come for committees, I do my top qualities first. And if, let's say there's 10, then I base it on diverse. Because if there's a qualified visible minority or qualified female, they go on to the top of my list for one of the simple reasons that is how you can go to parity. I worked in an organization in the federal government where gender parity was a big issue. And I'll tell you, I don't know many police women or fire women that believe in it. For the simple reason you question yourself, why did I get that position? And I know a lot of very qualified women that wouldn't go for the positions because of that. I think when we changed our system to when you put in your, well, it's called your PRP, whatever, that made a huge difference. And that's when a lot of women did step up to the plate because it removed gender right out of it. And you knew you got the job because you were qualified. And I do not like the word ensuring, because then that means if we had 50 candidates and only 2 women applied, then we've got to stop the whole system and start all over again until we get at least 5, if it's an 8-person committee, at least 4 women. So that's my big issue with that. So I really would prefer to have the discussion at GPC. I would prefer to have it once we receive the report from FCM, which is going to have all the recommendations, which was requested by us as municipalities, and not burdensome our staff with something that could probably take upwards to a year to do if they're going to do it properly. Thank you.
Councillor Gesselbrock on the deferral.
Thank you, Worship. My preference would be to have a staff report on this. I think that this is an issue. I think if I had a daughter and she looked at the picture of the, I think since the beginning of Nanaimo, there's been like 1 female mayor. She looks at the setup of council, and there's always more men, and asks the question, why is there usually more men? And I don't really have a good answer to that, other than that's the way things are. And I think that there's systemic issues that need to be addressed, and we as a council and as a community should be doing everything that we can to address them. And I think a lot of work has been done on this, and it would be nice to have all that information in one place so that when we have a conversation about this at the council table, we're all well educated on it. And I think that by deferring it without a report, we're going to have a conversation, then ask for a report, and it just delays it. And why delay things unnecessarily? So I think it'd be great to have a report. So I don't really support this deferral, so I won't be voting for it. And I would support for us to have a motion to get a report and then have it referred to the GPC where we can have a proper discussion on it in the right environment. Thank you.
Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Worship. I think that Councillor Martman's initial comments have convinced me to vote against her motion And the reason being is she quite elegantly explained that we do have a problem and we know we have a problem. And a conversation at GBC is not going to change that. All it's going to do is delay things down the road, because that's what will probably come out of that as well. This particular motion asks for a draft policy and framework ensuring gender parity. And quite honestly, I don't want to wait 175 years for our society to kind of get its act together so that we have the best minds and the best people leading our city. And to do that, we're going to have to, as we're going to say, we're going to have to break a few bricks to get through this wall, right? And some of the people out in our society may not like that, but that's just the way it is. We have an inequity here, and we have to make a change. And I don't think we should be delaying this at all. I think we should be voting on this tonight. Thank you.
Councillor Thorpe.
Oh, thank you, Your Worship. So I came prepared to debate this tonight, but I also will comment that I'm almost always in favor of receiving reports from staff to base my decisions on. In this case, I have to agree with the views expressed by Councillor Armstrong that I don't think this would be a good use of staff time, given that there will be a report that we can refer to. And also, I'd point out that earlier today we had a conversation about the value, as we see it as council, of the GPC, because it allowed for a more robust conversation about important issues. And I think we all agreed that that was a venue that we found valuable. And I think this is an important topic. I will tell you that I have some challenges with the proposed original motion. I have some disagreement with some of the statements that have been made both by the delegation and my fellow councillors, and I'll be happy to debate those if it comes to it. But I think I would prefer to have a good, more not casual, but a less structured debate and conversation about this whole topic. So if I am pushed to vote on it tonight, I certainly am prepared to do that, but I will support the motion currently on the deferral. Thank you.
Councillor Hemmens.
Thank you, Your Worship. So I really appreciate the perspective of Councillor Martman in wanting to have a full conversation about this. I won't be supporting the motion to defer, however, and that goes back to something that Councillor Armstrong said, and that's that all the reports say the same thing and that we know what needs to be done. So I don't know that having further conversation on this is going to actually bring value to that decision. I'd just like to remind everyone that the ask really is to write a staff report, and practically speaking, that could look as simple as looking at, there are other jurisdictions that do something similar to this. And, if we're asking for 10 committee members and we only have 2 women apply, maybe we just extend the date by another week. So maybe it's the language of ensuring that people are getting hung up on. But I assure you, my intention is to address the recruitment issue, because we know qualifications are not the issue, recruitment is the issue. So how can the city develop policy that addresses the recruitment issue? So again, going back to the deferral motion, I won't be supporting it. I don't think it's going to change the outcome of the vote. So my apologies.
Thank you, everyone. I'm going to offer a few comments. Everyone always says all my best friends are black was the old line or whatever, and of course they were still racist when they said it. And I don't want it to sound as silly as that. But let me say this. If the election last year had turned out differently, and there'd been 5 women on council, we probably wouldn't be concerned about this motion. The 2 top vote getters were in fact 2 of the women on this council. In terms of qualification, the last time I checked, 50% of the voters in this community are women. And yet the voters of this city, for whatever reason, and obviously some of them must have voted for the women who led the vote, and obviously for some of the men as well, chose not to vote for, with respect, the only woman who was running who had experience on council, Wendy Pratt, chose not to vote for Darcy Olson, chose not to vote for Alexis Peterson, chose not to vote for Ms. Zabayovsky or Bruni. I believe there might have been one other female candidate. And I appreciate that that's frustrating. And it's frustrating, I think, for a whole series of reasons, because in a perfect world, as Councillor Brown pointed out, we wouldn't be having this discussion. No one questioned, as Ruth Bader Ginsburg said, you know, when there were 9 men in the Supreme Court. But there's a lot of history that's happened along the way. And I'm very conscious of the fact that we are dealing with the city of Nanaimo as a jurisdiction, and I appreciate the references to international reports and international studies. But I would remind everyone in this audience of the 3 MLAs who represent Nanaimo in the provincial legislature. 2 of them are women. The chair of the Port Authority and her predecessor, both women. The president of VIU, a woman. The president of the board of the Chamber of Commerce, a woman. And so I appreciate that the issue is there, and I'm not minimizing the issue, but I would respectfully suggest this is a pretty progressive community in many respects. And with great respect to Councillor Hemmons and Councillor Brown's position on this around wanting us to get on with it and deal with it, I too have enormous trouble with the concept that we're going to ensure gender parity on all committees, because how's that going to be done without a system that somehow looks like a quota system, which will meet with considerable political opposition and will not do anything to engender the kind of cooperation that is needed if we're to move this agenda forward overall. If you had elected as voters a bunch of white males who didn't have the strong women, I'm being entirely personal here, weren't married to the strong women or in relationships with the strong women that I know each and every one of them to be, women who in many cases have not only participated in the raising of children but pursued their own careers, I'd be more concerned about that issue. I think this community elected a progressive council because they got it. The fact that they elected men to assist in doing it is something else. But we're talking about a draft policy to ensure parity on city committees. I can say rather cheekily that I have spent a certain amount of time, as the delegation well knows, trying to recruit women to run for political office, both at the council level and at the provincial level. I suffer no lack of confidence in my bona fides on this issue. And quite frankly, if you really want to advance the agenda forward for ensuring parity on committees, then for heaven's sakes, do what I did. As I say to cranky voters when they say they're not happy with their politicians, do what I did. Run. Nothing's stopping you. This is not a nomination contest for a provincial or federal party. The reality is anyone can run for council. You don't need a party. We don't have political parties in Nanaimo. If you want to ensure gender parity on city committees, then for heaven's sakes, go out as individual councillors and do your jobs with great respect and recruit the women who have the opportunity and chance of succeeding and developing their profile in the community so that maybe next time they'll be running against you for your position. I'm tempted to remind myself of something very humorous that my friend Graham Roberts, the former mayor, said to me when he was reading about this as a concept. And he said, "Gentlemen, the answer is simple. Resign." So I don't see any of us around this table who happen to be male thinking we're going to resign our seats. So I think this is worthy of much more discussion and much more fulsome debate. And I am finally most moved, and most importantly moved, by what Councillor Armstrong has had to say about the FCM study. I do not wish to see, at a time we're asking taxpayers to pay an increase that they probably weren't anticipating, even a nickel with great respect, to do something that will be done in a much more fulsome way by a much larger group of people who have the competency, I trust and hope, to offer a report that comes out of the whole municipal process across this country that may enable us to do something that is not only legally feasible, but likely to succeed. I'm not interested in, with great respect, running something up the flag and saying, aren't we wonderful because we support this. I'm interested in doing something that actually puts people in positions where we want them because we believe in the concept of parity. The best way to do that in the interim period is to ensure that we are, when we're appointing to committees, we do our job, we recruit people. If we don't like the list, then we stop the process, we go out and do our individual jobs and recruit people. And it's for all of those reasons, and I see I've inspired Councillor Brown now, it's for all of those reasons that I will be voting to defer. Councillor Brown.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. I would just like to say that bringing this forward, these motions forward, is doing our job. And doing our job is in accordance often with the values that we bring to the table, the items that members of the community tell us are important, and they do tell us different things. And also in accordance with our strategic plan around good governance. I note that you said the best thing we can do to ensure parity is encourage folks. You used the word ensure, and that is in the motion. That is what you aim for. Policy is flexible. It's a goalpost. You don't always get the goals. So I'm hearing a little bit of contradictory messages here, because when it comes to action, when it comes to encouragement, when it comes to doing what you can as a councillor with whatever platform you are given, you have to look at the tools that are available. And the tools that are available to me as a councillor sitting on the City of Nanaimo Council is to enact policy that helps secure a more just and equitable future for all members of our community. Not because I think that there's unqualified women that need to be in seats. It's because I think there's qualified women that are not in seats. If we want to talk about the last election, I believe there was, 8 women that ran, 39 men.
10 and 40.
10 and 40. That's a big difference. That's a big discrepancy. So I will, and I make mistakes, but I will continue to encourage women to step up for committees, to run for council, even if that means, if I chose to run again, that I lost my seat.
Councillor Himmons. No, Councillor Armstrong.
Okay, I'm listening to all of this, but when I look at this table, all I see is white people. Nobody's talking about that. We're not talking about that. We've got 3 women here. We do not have one person from a visible minority. That, to me, is far more concerning than gender parity. And I think we need to really look at that. I want the best person for all of our committees. And like I say, I will break it down until the qualities, and then I will use diversity, like what's their diversity, gender, all of that as my final decision-making capabilities. And that is within our hands already. And I agree with the mayor, like we can be going out doing our own recruitment. How many have done that? That's a big issue. And the second thing, when you say, and I'm just going to read it, this comes right from the FCM. It's like the diverse voices, tools and practices support all women. This will be coming to us in 3 months. I don't see the urgency to take staff members off of projects to do that. When it's using examples from select municipalities, one being the Cowichan Valley, it provides resources and tools for local action to support women as leaders and agents of change. I don't see the urgency of getting our staff who have, and I'm sure it's probably going to go to Ms. Bulpal Singh, who is busy with the OCP, Health and Housing Task Force, and whatever, because that's her thing, to take her away from those things. Also, we're going to have to make a decision. Which one do we pull her from? Health and Housing? OCP review? When we've got this tool coming to us in 3 months, I don't see the urgency to push this through without waiting to see what the FCM says. I just don't get it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Armstrong. Councillor Bonner.
Excuse me, Your Worship. Thank you, Your Worship. Regarding the amendment and your point of recruiting people, I am been hearing for the better part of a couple of decades men in leadership roles saying how they're really out there helping get women elected of all colors.
Not the same as recruiting.
And recruiting, because you have to recruit them to get them elected. And how's it been working out for you so far, right? We have a situation where we had, as Councillor Turley mentioned, 10 women ran, 40 men. And those are not good odds. And I don't think it's been working, and this particular motion, reason why I wanted to see it dealt with tonight, helps deal with that in a very small way, but helps get us over that hurdle. Thank you.
Councillor Hemmens, last word to you.
Thank you. I agree with Councillor Armstrong. We need everyone at this table. And as I said in my notes, this is an important first step. That's a really worthwhile conversation that I look forward to having, but we have to start somewhere, and nobody else is proposing any sort of policy around diversity. So this is what we've got. To Your Worship, your point that we're already doing it well, if we're already doing it well, great, let's just put it in policy. Let's just formalize what we're already doing well. That shouldn't be an issue. And finally, somewhat cheekily, and with respect, to borrow your language, I'm going to quote you. From a news release when Equal Voice and myself applied for FCM grants, and I would like to remind everyone I am in regular contact with FCM. I know these reports, this work is being done. This is an evolution. It's not a step one, step two. It all goes together. Your Worship, you said that you were delighted exceptional women in the Central Island are working for gender parity so successfully. Girls and women in our community need to see more women in political leadership if we want to build inclusive communities. And I agree with you. I completely agree with you. But what I would like to see is not just delighted that exceptional women in the Central Island are working on this, but that exceptional leaders are working on this, and that includes men and women.
Councillor Turley.
Thank you, Worship. I too will be voting for deferral because I have a whole page of comments I'd like to make, and I don't think tonight's the time to do it. However, the one comment I will make is that there is a solution out there that's really simple that doesn't require a staff report to do, and that's very simple. This came from my daughter. It's very simple. You just, the application forms that we see, you black out the names. The staff have a number on the application form, and that takes, as our people that presented to us, takes the gender bias out of it. The other concern is we're talking about bias against women, but I can almost guarantee you that the Youth Advisory Committee will be almost entirely female applications, as witnessed through Rotaract and Interact and the membership that they have. I know that's not for this discussion. But
The motion is to defer to the GPC. All those in favor of the motion? Contrary? Councillors Gesselbrock, Hemmens, Brown, and Bonner. The motion carries. We're now on to the second delegation, or second time for the same delegation, with respect to the motion that a report be prepared for council with a draft policy and framework for reimbursing child minding expenses for members of council and city committee members that are incurred as a result of participation in official City of Nanaimo meetings. Hello again, and state your name for the record, please. Hello again, and state your name for the record, please.
Again, here from Equal Voice Central Vancouver Island.
And I'm Maeve O'Byrne.
And thank you again to His Worship the Mayor and Council for having us here tonight. I'd also like to reiterate thanks to the Council and His Worship for the support of our Women Lead initiative. We're very excited to be working with Councillor Hemmens on this project. We also now want to voice our support for the second motion that is being brought forward by Councillor Brown and Hemmens. I talked about VIU in our last presentation, so keeping it a bit local here, and I wanted to mention them again. Because of the work they're doing around gender parity, they realized that some of the scheduling of their meetings for committees, other organizations, groups at the institution are being held at the wrong time. That is challenging for families to get to because they have to go home and look after young children. It's particularly challenging for women. So the university is reviewing the scheduling to see if it can be changed, and also considering the question of how daycare costs could be supported to encourage participation outside of working hours. Might seem like a small thing, but numerous studies have shown that subsidized or free childcare can have a large impact on whether or not women can participate in committees, boards, political roles, and in leadership positions. According to a Globe and Mail article from October 2019, there is a direct connection between the lack of affordable childcare and the lack of women in senior management in Canada. In a 2019 report from the Standing Committee of the Status of Women, the presence and age of the youngest child in the house has a notable impact on women's work hours outside the home, but very little effect on men's work hours. And in that same report, it was recorded that the cost of childcare was a barrier to women's participation in electoral politics. Another way to look at this is what the impact of free or subsidized childcare is on women's participation. A report from the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development states that greater access to subsidized childcare facilities is the most effective way that governments can enable women to be involved in these positions. In Canada, Quebec introduced universal childcare in 1997, and between then and 2016, workforce participation from women between the ages of 20 and 44 has increased from 76% to 85%, much more than it increased in the rest of Canada. As well, research has suggested that every dollar invested into childcare returns $8.60 back into the economy over the child's lifetime. And that is something that benefits everyone in the community. And again, it's why VIU is also looking at this.
The fact remains that women take on the bulk of childcare, and if there isn't affordable, reliable options, then many will simply opt to stay home instead. That is why we at Equal Voice would like to voice our support for this second motion. In the 2016 census report, 68% of families in Nanaimo were headed by single parents, both men and women. We see this motion as not something that is good for the city, but something that can set an example for other organizations which are looking at ways to support parity. In other words, we don't just think that city staff and committee members should have access to free or subsidized childcare. We think universal childcare should be a right for everyone, for the very impactful reasons we brought forward tonight. As a single parent myself, I knew the challenges, and I know the challenges of trying to sit on committees, working late hours, and trying to take care of 2 children. In order to reach this place, we need organizations such as the city to set an example. We know that subsidized or free childcare has a direct impact on increasing the number of women who are participating in local politics, including committees. Women with exceptional qualifications who have a lot to offer this community, and also men who are single parents have a lot to offer this community who also cannot get childcare. We believe strongly in the impact such approach can have. We have offered free childcare at some of our events to encourage participation. Other cities and organizations in Canada, BC, and our region are taking these issues very seriously and either have or are considering introducing free or subsidized childcare. So we would ask Your Honour the Mayor and Council to give this motion due time and consideration. As the image on the screen suggests, the task before us is to create an environment in which everyone is starting from the same place in terms of their capacity and ability to participate and access opportunities. One way out is to even the playing field, is to provide subsidized or free childcare. It would also support gender parity, which in the long run will benefit everyone in the community. Finally, supporting such an initiative would allow the city to act as a positive role model for other organizations. As noted in the 2015 United Cities and Local Government Report, the first task of local government is to act as a model of best practices for our communities. Thank you again for your time and consideration tonight.
Thank you. Any questions for the delegation? Councillor Turley.
Yes, Your Worship, through you to the delegation. You mentioned wrong hours to hold meetings. What do you consider to be wrong hours?
Wrong hours?
Wrong hours, I said long hours.
I heard wrong.
My apologies, it meant to be long, and that would be 60 plus hours.
Oh, like a florist.
Any questions?
No further questions. Thank you very much. Councillor Brown?
Thank you, Your Worship. I would like to move the motion as presented.
Seconded, Councillor Hemmens.
And if I may speak to it, Your Worship?
Please.
Thank you. And thank you for the delegation and their presentation. First, I'd just like to acknowledge that I appreciate Council having this discussion. I know it's not an easy discussion. I know there's opinions on the last topic and on this topic out there, and people have very strong opinions, and that's good. I've heard many of them, those in support and those against. And so I thank everyone that's taking the time, whether it's a contrary opinion, to send in a respectful opinion. Ideally, I would love to see this conversation, and I hope if this motion was passed, it would be wrapped up in the conversation around council remuneration, because I believe the two are actually quite interlinked. And I think folks often say, and citizens say, sort of universally, that it's great to have a diversity of perspectives on council. And I feel very privileged, and I know probably each and every one of you do from the conversations I've had to be here. I feel privileged for the support the community gave me in being here, and a lot of people voted for me to be here based on the values that I articulated through the campaign. Not all of those support this particular motion, and that's okay. Some do. But I think others also have an interest in governance, and they want to give back. And when I say I'm privileged to sit here to have the pleasure of serving the community, but I'm also privileged in the sense that I have a family that supports this endeavor, the long hours, that provides care for our two boys when we need that care. And even friends that at times are willing, have offered to step up. And I even know actually members of this particular council have offered, and I appreciate that. Not everybody has that privilege. And there's provincial programs in place, and this is where I think there's some confusion around this, the affordable child care benefit that casts a pretty wide net in providing support for families based on income and providing a subsidy for child care. But over this last year, as many of us had, and we've got to learn the job, and part of that job is learning the hours, and there's some late meetings and items like that. There is the potential for gaps between the demands of council, the meetings of council, like this meeting tonight, where licensed childcare in our community is not necessarily provided, because there's no providers that, not a lot of providers go past 6. There's a huge problem when it comes to spaces. We know that. If you talk to parents that want to go back to work or any items like that. And so it's in those gaps that I think someone, if was a single parent, looked at the wage of a councillor, even with those that serve on the RDN, looked at what you would qualify under the affordable child care benefit, and you would say, this job has the potential for me to have to be out of pocket in a lot of cases. It can be very difficult to find employment. Not all employers are flexible, and the demands of the jobs are tough. I know you folks know that. So what I'm asking for council here is not to say let's approve child care benefits for everybody on council. It's simply to say can we take a look here at barriers for voices that may wish to run for council but would self-edit and say, I just can't do that, and get a report from staff on where there may be those gaps with the child care benefit and the demands of council, and then have that information as we discuss remuneration. And if there is a case where we might say as a council, hey, there's a hole there, where we might not necessarily be comfortable with, a proposal like Victoria, but we might say, well, for the minor expense that this would result in when combined with the affordable child care benefit, there may be an opportunity for us to reduce barriers for those running for council in the future. That's all. I'm simply asking for more information on the matter for a future discussion about the privilege of our positions, and for the possibility of others to also step up and have their voices in these seats Because I think, like all voices, as Councillor Armstrong, actually I think really on pointly brought up, is we do need to make effort to make sure that all voices have an equal opportunity and an equitable opportunity to at least put themselves out there to serve the community and represent the city in a manner that they see as important. Ultimately, the voters will decide.
Thank you. Councillor Martman.
Thank you. I struggled with this motion the most, and for that reason, I'm again going to present a deferral to the GPC. And if I get a seconder, I'll speak to it.
Seconded.
Part of the reason, and I don't look at childcare as woman or male, it's gender, it's whoever cares for children. I absolutely agree there should be a universal childcare. And it takes a village to raise a child. However, when I first saw this, I thought, for those that volunteer, I could maybe see that perhaps we're not getting all the brilliant minds if this is a barrier to somebody being on the committee. I struggled with the fact of those in paid positions such as us on City Council. It might work out to $2 an hour is what it comes down to for all the work we put in, but we still are paid for it. So that one I personally struggle with, but it's not a conversation I want to have right now. It's a conversation that there's so many complexities to this. Do you give child funding, but is there an income limit? Or maybe somebody who had enough money wouldn't even ask for the child care to be reimbursed. I don't know, but I don't think we're giving proper direction to staff on a report to be prepared when we haven't actually indicated what we'd like the report to look like, or what are some of the intricacies or complexities involved around this type of motion. And I really want to have a healthy debate. It's worthy of it. I understand why Councillor Hemmens and Councillor Brown are putting this forward, and I thank you for it, because we need to have these conversations. But I'd really like to have it at a GPC.
Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm in support of this motion. The very first time I formally announced that I was running for this council, the very first question after my speech was on what issues I had with barriers to women and visible minorities from attending and running in politics and being on city council. And I said at that time, I would be looking forward to finding ways to lower barriers to all of those people who want to participate in this thing. And I view this particular motion as one of those lowering of the barriers, because this motion speaks to not universal child care and all those other things. It speaks to a person making the decision of whether or not to participate on city committees or run for council on whether or not they can afford it. And if that is going to be the decision, then the people making that decision will be the ones who can afford it. And those will be the men in our society who are well off, or they're retired, or they're elderly and retired and well off.
Single women.
And so I see this motion as one of a small ways of lowering the barriers so that people don't have to make that decision if they want to run for council. They may decide not to for a number of other additions, but it should never be the basis of whether or not they can afford to. So I'm very much in favor.
But wait, this is the deferral motion.
I'm going to vote against the deferral motion based on that.
Thank you. Thank you. Councillor Armstrong.
I'll be voting in favor of the referral. I think, again, it needs much more fulsome discussion that we can get to tonight. One of my concerns is those that look after elderly parents, that, you know, we're discriminating against them by putting this forward. My other concern is if this does go to city council members who we make almost $60,000, you know, what about the person that's working at Tim Hortons making $14 an hour that has 2 little kids that has to do that, and then they have to pay taxes on top of that so that we can have daycare. So I struggle with that. I don't know why we would be above that. So I would really like to have more discussion, and I would like to know the impact if this does happen for city council, if then the union now uses that all city employees must have daycare as well, which will be a significant increase to our budget. I was looking at the numbers just for North Van, just to do their one meeting, like their one meeting a week for council or whatever it is. In their budget, just for 6 months, which is six meetings, is $15,000. So you start adding the dollars up, and pretty soon we're well over $100,000. So I think we need to have a more fulsome discussion and really narrow down to what we mean by it, as Councillor Martman said. Thank you.
Councillor Hammonds.
Thank you. Like the previous one, I won't be supporting the referral, although I have a feeling I know where this is going. I'd like to say that I see this motion as a tool towards the first motion. It's about removing barriers for those who typically wouldn't participate. It's truly become quite murky with the addition of councillors. And I think Councillor Brown and I had a conversation about should we remove that, and it was a bit of a damn the torpedoes moment. You know, we've stated very publicly, this isn't about us, this isn't for this council, no one at this table would use this. I'm thinking of the single mom who is interested in this and who maybe works at McDonald's, but just like Councillor Bonner said, would never contemplate it because she couldn't afford childcare. So I want to address something, this idea that we knew what we were getting into and how much it was going to cost and how much time. And I agree with all of that. And I also don't think that should prevent us from looking towards making this job easier for the next bunch that comes in behind us. Towards the minuscule budgetary item, I actually think $15,000 to do 6 meetings is quite minuscule. And I also think there's examples like Victoria where their policy says, if you're going to come and bring your children, give us a heads up, we'll bring in a babysitter. And it's used so little that I don't think they've spent $1,000 on it this year. So it's not, this isn't a huge budget line item. This isn't a, yeah, I'm just going to keep repeating myself. I'm against the deferral because I think this conversation needs to happen.
Councillor Thorpe.
Thank you, Your Worship. Similar thoughts to the previous motion, but I would encourage all councillors to speak to the deferral because I'm hearing quite a bit of argument on the motion itself, and I'm quite prepared to argue on this motion, and I will state that I don't have the uncertainty about my feeling on this one as I did on the first motion. However, I would agree with, I think, the very first thing that Councillor Brown said earlier, and this does go to the referral, that this, to me, directly relates to council compensation. That's what it comes down to. It's asking, and it's very clear, the motion asks for staff to form a policy to see council and committee members compensated. And I would point out to council, and I suppose for this reason I would support deferral, that there is regular examination of councillor compensation, and that happens every few years. It should have happened prior to now. It was delayed, but it is in the works and will be coming to council, hopefully within the year. And I look forward to that report, and I will add that that is done by an impartial source, and it speaks to what is fair compensation for what is supposed to be a part-time job for councillors who are giving of their time for public service. And that's a position I personally strongly agree with, not to negate the arguments I'm hearing for the need for childminding. But my point is we are going to be dealing with the issue of compensation on a larger scale, and so I'm willing to defer this conversation to be part of that. Otherwise, if the vote goes the other way, then I will be adding more comments to the debate. Thank you.
Councillor Gesselbrook.
Thank you, Your Worship. I came prepared to debate this motion. I think investigating how we can lower barriers to access to our democratic institutions is important to have, so I won't be supporting the deferral.
Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Your Worship. speaking to the deferral, which is always hard to do because the issues can be intertwined.
I haven't been harsh.
No, you have not. You've been very gracious, so thank you. Obviously, I put this motion forward with Councillor Hemmens, but taking the tone at the table and how the first vote goes, I actually think whether this policy is developed now or this conversation happens as part of council compensation, both essentially achieves the same thing. And I think actually when having a discussion around compensation, I think this conversation is actually even more important then. So I would be willing to support a deferral, not to the Governance and Priorities Committee, but a deferral that this topic be considered when council remuneration is discussed. And the reason I would propose that slight amendment is I wish I would have had identified this when we were talking about the terms of reference for our review when it was brought forward, and how many months ago now. But you don't know what you don't know. And so after a year in the seat as a father with essentially 2 under 2 for the majority of the year, you learn something. And that experience has sort of showed me that this conversation is worth happening, and it could be addressed through remuneration. It could not be, but I think that the conversation should happen. So if I would propose that to Councillor Martman, it was her deferral, but I think the conversation is more responsibly had at the governance, at whatever the meeting is where we'll be discussing remuneration.
Councillor Hemmens.
Thank you. So the bigger piece for me of this motion is compensation for committee and task force volunteers. So if I'm willing to support if it's an amendment to have the conversation go to council remuneration for council, but that I'd like to include a conversation at the GPC where we discuss parity of removing barriers, one of which may be providing childcare for family members who participate on task force or committees.
Motion before us is one for deferral, and I can state without hesitation that the motion in its present form will never receive my support. The concept that I bring to this place, and perhaps I'm lucky because financially the Crows are comfortable, but having raised 2 children, the son of a widowed mother who raised 4 children, the concept, the very concept that I would ask other hard-working taxpayers in this community, whether they're tenants or property owners, because if they're tenants, they indirectly pay property taxes to their landlord, ask them to subsidize the cost of childcare for council as if they are some privileged group in our community who get a benefit that no working collective agreement I'm aware of in this community provides, and I'm only talking about Nanaimo, that no company provides its employees, is to me, frankly, I won't say repugnant, but I think it speaks to a sense of entitlement, and I know that's not where it comes from, but I can say to my fellow councillors, that's what the public reaction is, and not inappropriately, frankly. This is public service. It is about showing leadership. You do not show leadership by giving yourself a benefit that nobody else in the community has. You show leadership by sacrifice. And it is a sacrifice in public life. And each and every one of you who has no political experience prior understands that now. You do not go to the grocery store anymore and pass unnoticed down the vegetable aisle. You do not get to go to public events without being recognized and asked to say something, etc. I get all of that. So I speak heartily in favor of the deferral because with great respect, this is an issue that is unnecessarily, based on the wording of this motion, divided this community, raised an unnecessary sense of rancor, and brought a lot of discourse to a subject that is important and worthy of consideration, which is the whole concept of parity and diversity in representation in terms of council and committees. So I'm voting in favor of the deferral. Councillor Brown, you get the last word today.
Thank you. I will be voting in favor of deferral. I would just like to say I think the tone in which we discuss and the language in which we use is important at this table. And I don't ever want a councillor to feel like they shouldn't bring forward a motion and feel like their leadership on things that are important to them should be questioned. So hearing what has been expressed at the table, I think this conversation can carry on at a GPC, or I would hope that staff would identify the meeting at which this would be most appropriate to discuss it. So I will be voting for deferral. Again, thank you for everyone for having this conversation. I know it's not easy, but I definitely wouldn't say that it's a shameful conversation to be happening.
Councillor Thorpe.
If I may, Your Worship, thank you. Just a point of clarification before we vote on the deferral. I'm hearing that this is being deferred not to a GPC for our discussion, but to be...
It is to a GPC. That is the motion.
I'm sorry, I heard somewhere in the conversation it was referred to the compensation review, which is about to be held.
Thank you, Worship. So the motion is to defer to a GPC meeting. There was conversation about it being included in the compensation review, which I believe staff have heard, and I was trying to get your attention, but my button's been broken all night, so the waving hasn't been helping. So yes, I believe staff have heard that, and it could be a combination of both included in the compensation review, which a report will be coming forward to you, and as well as a future GPC discussion. But the motion right now is for GPC.
Is the GPC.
Thank you for that clarification. And if I may, Your Worship, then through you to Mr. Rudolph, at that meeting, would we also be getting an update on the possible timeline and the format for that compensation review? Ms. Gurry, I thought your button was broken.
It is. I'm waving. Yes, the report is scheduled to come to the December 16th meeting, this meeting, on an update on where the compensation review is at and the progress made to date, and to get some clarification going forward.
Thank you.
The question is deferral to the GPC. All those in favor? Contrary? Councillors Gesselbrock, Hemmens, and Bonner.
And Your Worship, there was a recess scheduled for 9.
I
would
was
suggest
thinking
that.
about that earlier, but it's probably a good idea to get this section over with. So we either have to agree, I believe, to just carry on, or do we have to take the break?
You have till 11 to worry about that. Right now, it's just a recess. So there was a recess, regularly scheduled recess for 9 p.m. that I think we could use, and then at 11, we'll determine whether we carry on.
You know, I hate to quit working. All right, recess for 10 minutes.
Please, thank you. There will be a new decorum statement read out at the start of each meeting to ensure proper decorum is taking place and to assist the chair in his duties. So the proper rules of order and the decorum will be as follows. There will be only one speaker at a time that will have the floor as directed by the chair of the meeting. There will be no interruptions or call-out comments while another person has the floor. Anyone speaking out without having been acknowledged by the chair will be found out of order. If that person does not refrain from speaking without having been acknowledged by the chair, then he or she will be required to leave. For the members of the public speaking, the comments need to be respectful and constructive. Discriminatory or defamatory comments or comments that are in the nature of harassment will not be tolerated, and anyone engaging in such communications will be found out of order. Some examples of behavior that won't be tolerated at a council meeting are as follows. 1. Harassment. In terms of comments about city employees, employees of the City of Nanaimo have a right not to be subjected to discriminatory or defamatory comments or personal attacks against their competency or character. All speakers must refrain from such comments about identifiable staff. Comments should be limited to issues regarding the city's policies or operations. Number 2. Section 7 of the Human Rights Code prohibits a discriminatory publication because of race, color, ancestry, place of origin, religion, marital status, family status, physical or mental disability, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity or expression, or age. Discriminatory comments will not be tolerated. Number 3, defamation is publication about a person that tends to hurt that person's reputation. Defamatory comments will not be tolerated. Please stick to known facts and keep the dialogue respectful and constructive.
Are you tired of dragging the garbage out? They just don't make them like they used to. It's a saying that doesn't really apply to garbage cans. Yes, young man, you seem ready for a new garbage and recycling experience. Take a look at the new green, blue, and black carts right behind you. Yes, exactly. Oh, I see your confusion. I can fix it. Go ahead, give them a try. Pretty easy to roll, right? Did you know that a set of these carts will be delivered to every house in Nanaimo as a part of the new Sort, Toss, Roll program? It's designed to make it easy for you to sort your waste, toss it into the correct cart, and roll it to the curb.
3 carts will be assigned to your home, but the city actually owns them. This way, the city will maintain responsibility for repairing and replacing the carts when it's needed.
Wow, you really are happy about this. There are a few things you need to know before you start wheeling your carts to the curb. Are you ready? Great, let's get ready to sort, toss, roll.
Yeah!
Did you think that this was a silent video? Well, now that you've found your voice, why don't you narrate this next bit?
The new Sort, Toss, Roll automated curbside collection program is coming to Nanaimo in 2 phases. Phase 1 is being rolled out to central Nanaimo now. Sort, Toss, Roll will come to the rest of Nanaimo in the summer of 2018. Carts will be delivered and placed at the end of your driveway, yard, or curbside. This is how you should place your carts on collection days. An information package will be left for you, further introducing you to the new program, with information spanning from instructions on how to place your cart on different types of streets to options for cart upsizing, or details on what goes into each cart.
Wow, you really know your stuff. Tell me, why are there 3 colors of carts?
Well, this one is for organics, this one is for garbage, and this blue one over here is for any recyclables.
Very good. Now, what goes into the blue recycling cart?
Cardboard, plastic containers, milk jugs, cans, or anything that used to go into the yellow recycling bags.
Now, David, what goes into the green cart?
The green cart is for your organics. Any compostable food, pizza boxes, or napkins. Anything that used to go into the old organics bin.
And?
And what?
I'll give you a hint.
Yard clippings.
Yes, the new green cart has plenty of room for grass and weeds. Now, what about the black cart?
Easy. That one is for garbage. Any waste that can't be composted or recycled. But what if the carts aren't big enough?
Well, the city of Nanaimo has an exchange program in place. Homes that have more demand for recycling and household waste can upsize their carts. That reminds me, anyone that has questions about the Sort Toss Roll program can call the hotline or visit our webpage.
The standard 240-litre blue recycling cart can hold 3 times the amount of recyclables as your yellow bag, and it won't blow away in the wind. The 120-litre green cart can hold 3 times as much as your old green bin, and the 120-litre black bin is about the size of 1.5 garbage bags. And now, you won't even need to buy those black garbage bags.
Are you going to get that?
I probably should. Take over for a bit, will you?
Okay.
Excellent. Thanks.
Hang on. Let's try this. Sort Toss Roll is a new way of doing away with waste. New trucks are a big part of the program and come equipped with an automated arm to lift, dump, and replace the carts on collection day. The trucks are efficient. Each truck has 2 compartments and can pick up both your weekly organics and your recycling or garbage. They are also fueled by compressed natural gas, so they are green too. And the trucks are safe. Our waste collectors no longer need to lift the cans manually. This means far less injuries on the job and happier workers. The new trucks are awesome. The arms can reach out up to 10 feet to pick up the carts. It is important you place them properly on collection day though, to make sure that your waste and recycling can be picked up. How you place your carts depends largely on the type of street your home is on. If your street looks like this, with a sidewalk divided and set in from the curb, place your carts like this. If your street looks like this, with a sidewalk and a curb as one, place your carts like this. If your street doesn't have a sidewalk or curb, place your carts like this at the end of your driveway. And finally, if you have a curbed sidewalk but can't place your carts behind the sidewalk because of a wall, ditch, or fence, place your carts like this in front of the curb. Always remember to place your carts 1 meter apart to allow room for the automated arm, and point the arrow on your cart legs towards the street. In the occasional neighborhood, there are other factors that may affect how you can place your carts, such as street parking or steep hills. The City of Nanaimo will find a collection solution for every situation. It may not look like it, but there's technology in the carts. Each cart has a digital ID tag, which tells the truck which house it belongs to and whether it's the recycling, organics, or waste cart, so that it gets dumped to the right compartment at pickup.
Contamination happens when things that can't get recycled get tossed into the blue cart. Styrofoam, plastic bags and glass can't be accepted at the curb. The automated sorting machine at the recycling facility cannot process them. This means contaminated loads of recycling end up being sent to landfill. So do your part and recycle smart.
Sort Toss Roll. It's easy, efficient, green, clean, and safe.
I was going to say that.
Go ahead then.
It's easy, efficient, green, clean, and safe.
That about sums it up.
David, time for dinner.
Don't worry, we've covered a lot today, and if people want to learn more about Sort Toss Roll,
call the hotline, 250-756-5390.
Come on, David.
I've got to go.
What was that number again?
250-756-5390.
To order. The next item is item 10, reports. Snow and ice removal communications overview. Mr. Sims, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. Appreciate the opportunity to be in front of you here this evening on this particular topic. It's topical, given that there's a number of areas within the community that saw some snowflakes falling. I didn't sense a wide variety of panic over the weekend, but there it was. I'd also like to acknowledge that the work on city snow removal or snow clearing is across the entire organization. So everyone deals with this, from communications. Ms. Verocchi is here and prepared the updated communication plan in front of you, to Ms. Gurry's department in dealing with slip and fall claims, to Parks and Rec, who deal with not only the parks, but also we support each other in pedestrian routes around the city, and of course, development services and bylaw enforcement. So there's a number of, it's as I say, a cross-departmental issue, including Your Worship's office, who receives the phone calls when certain streets don't get plowed. So just a brief overview, and the Mayor's report this evening, you stole a lot of the thunder, Your Worship, but appreciate the opportunity to repeat it. So it's, as I say, the operational departments that work on snow clearing are largely public works and parks. And between public works with their 18 pieces of tandem axles with plows, salters, and brine trucks, and we have parks with also with pickup trucks and plows, backhoes, and good old-fashioned manual labor. We enlist the aid of contractors in 100 kilometers of streets. We often talk about lane kilometers, but in this case, it's 100 kilometers of city streets. And they also look after some of the facilities, such as the recreational facilities, Oliver Woods, Bevan Park, etc. We estimate the annual snowfall is in the range of $50,000 to $70,000 for a 24-hour period. It tapers up and ramps down, but this is kind of a ballpark. So every day that goes by, we're spending a fair bit of money. And February's event this year was quite unusual in that it started snowing and it kept snowing for a solid week. And our normal or average winter would see about 10 days of snowfall a year. And the normal pattern is snow's on the ground for a few days and then it melts. And in fact, City of Surrey did a bit of a review and found that over the last 15 years or so, the average temperature is increasing, the average depth of snow and the number of days are decreasing. As you can see there, our annual budget across the organization is about $850,000. So we've already put a number of processes into place. We're already receiving, as of the 1st of November, twice daily weather forecasts. That's 7 days a week. So a number of staff are monitoring that, and that's across the organization again. And both on the Parks and Public Works side, we've got patrols out there almost 24 hours a day, as well as our early shift that starts at 5 in the morning. And when we get these, one of the most challenging events and common events that we deal with is flash freezes, where you get an overnight moisture and then a sudden clearing and a drop in temperature about 6 in the morning, in which case we combat that with brining. And as Your Worship said, we start with priority ones, and generally we start plowing those when snow depth starts to get around 2 centimeters, and our target is to get those done within the first 24 hours and then get on to the priority 2 routes. And the priority 3 and 4 may take longer. These are the dead-end streets or the parks that are at the far fringes of the communities. And if we continue to have snow, then we're back to the priority 1 routes. And between both parks and public works, there's the prioritizing system. So you can imagine, I believe that's on the next slide, our high priorities are emergency transit and the emergency routes or first responder routes, and pedestrian facilities in the downtown core, some of the waterfront walkway, the harborfront walkways, and that sort of things. And the message that's consistent around pedestrians, because this seems to be topical, is I'm going to read it out because this is the consistent. Please be aware that residents, occupants, tenants, and businesses are required to clear snow and ice within 24 hours of a snow event as per City Bylaw 5000, Section 22-1. So that's in all of our communications that we put out. Ms. Farokhi can speak to that a little bit. This is just a map of showing the basics priority 1 routes. One of the routes that's not on here is, for example, Hammond Bay Road, which is a contractor plowed route. The other one that's not shown is the Island Highway, the Parkway, and Duke Point Highway. Those are maintained by Ministry of Transportation. So priority 2 routes, just a similar spot. So an example would be some of the, we call them collector roads or busier residential streets or commercial streets, as well as some of the parks around, like the Rotary Park Fieldhouse as an example, or Departure Bay Walkway would be other examples. The priority 3s, as mentioned, are typically the cul-de-sacs, and those are the ones that often create the most calls. People that live on cul-de-sacs are wondering why their roads aren't plowed, but those are often the last we get to. The other interesting point, or the challenging point, with a lot of streets is that it's narrow. People park on the street, and it's really tough to get a plow down them. I'll just bounce the mouse over to Ms. Farokhi to talk a little bit about some of the communication issues and some of the key messages that we're putting out.
Thank you.
Top button. There you go.
Thank you, Mr. Sims and your worship and council, for the opportunity to come to you and give you an update on a motion you passed at a GPC meeting regarding staff to come back with a communication strategy on snow and ice removal. So it took some time and met with various departments, which Mr. Sims spoke about, from Public Works Engineering to bylaws to even the business licensing team to find out what happened, what kind of communication the city does, because I was not here during the previous snow event, to find out communications prior to snow events, during snow events, and after snow events. And we've got some potential application of communication opportunities that are, you'll find on pages from 73 and onwards. So if you wouldn't mind flipping over to page 73, I'd like to start off with prior to snow events, and I'll be really quick. It looks like this in your report.
Dan's going to bring it up.
I think Dan's going to, it's in the actual package, the agenda package. Okay. One more down, please, Dan. Perfect. So you guys are at 75, I see, sorry. In June, the city works with with Parks and Rec and starts creating messaging for the activity guide. The activity guide goes out from August and is good until March of the next year. So there, for your reference, in the Annex A, you'll see what is in this year's activity guide for snow and ice control messaging. And we've also got for Annex B last year's, for the 2018 edition. So you can see that this is something that's been happening for a number of years. So I just went back to last year. And the activity guide is, there's 20,000 copies that are printed, and it's distributed not only in city facilities, but at libraries, at different malls, grocery stores, including, as well as Sport Check, Central Island Immigration Society, and of course, our website as well. Throughout the month of October to December, we had a big meeting that incorporated feedback from Public Works, Engineering, bylaws, and we discussed snow and ice removal communication. So we've completely revamped the SNCC website. So it's got, if you go to it, you will see it's different
content there. It's refreshed. It includes the priority routes, so what the city's priorities are, messaging around sidewalk clearing, and it really brings in the community sense of community pride, everyone coming together and helping out their neighbor, because as you know, the bylaw says within 24 hours of snowfall, people are to clear their sidewalks, and what we're asking the community is to continue to do that, to be that great neighbor that they already are. We've also, members of my team, especially Derek Johnson, had gone out and done video ride-alongs and really creating videos that help the public understand what happens during a snowfall. So we've added those videos on the snow and ice control page as well. From a messaging standpoint, you saw some of the messaging that we have right there. It talks about, again, emergency routes are being a priority. We talk about bylaw 5000 and just messaging so that people can stay safe. If you turn to the next page, during snow events, anyone who has access to the radio station or TV will likely know that the media will pick up and report on anything to do with snow events. And our team, the Public Works, they will alert radio stations early in the morning and throughout the day in regards to how the road conditions are and what drivers are to expect during their commute. So I know that our manager of operations calls into the Wave and the Wolf and reports what's happening. The communications team works with, of course, the roads team and others to send out news releases updating the public and media as to what's happening, key messages that they would like us to share with the public is sent out to, again, not only radio stations, but everything from print to actual TV. And I was told by our manager of operations that he was interviewed by Global, CTV, you name it, all the big major media conglomerates last year during the snow event. So, and we also remind the public that when there is a snow event to check the city's website, social media page, tune into the radio station and so forth. The next page is on after snow events. So this is when it temporarily stops snowing. This is where we remind, and the crews go back to maintaining their the plows and getting ready for the next snowfall. We go out and remind people of bylaw 5000 to help their neighbor. And again, we've got some key messages on page 75, or on the screen there, page 77, of what is being done and how the messaging is distributed. Now, the next page, if you would mind flipping over, is where there's potential amplification of communication opportunities. One of the things I'm pleased to share with you is that I met with the business licensing team, and we were able to put the messaging that winter is almost here, please be aware about bylaw 5000, and it went out to 7,000 business licenses it went out through 7,000 business license fee invoices about 2 weeks ago. So that's from commercial to home businesses, and that we looked at the costing for it, and it was free because it was on an invoice that was done internally. You'd also asked about amplification, about doing advertising in the local paper. For one page advertising, it's around $2,500. So if you want 4 advertising to go into the paper 4 times, you're looking at $10,000. We looked at inserts in the local paper, thinking that that might be a little bit cheaper. And as you can see, just to do a run, it's around $11,000, and that's one time. So if we wanted to put inserts about the messaging for snow and ice removal, what to do, how to clear things, etc., you're looking at $11,000 per run, and that doesn't include the printing costs because it just depends on the sizing and the stock paper, etc. We also looked at direct mail, how much it would be for that one shot to the entire Nanaimo residents. And just for residential properties, you're looking at $33,000. And again, that's just for the mail costing. It doesn't include printing or, the printing and design cost. So, and then we looked at inserting some of the communication for snow and ice removal in city utility bills. And right now, the billing cycle is based on categories and factors that impact the city's ability to send out bills on a certain date. So we're still investigating this to see when we can potentially take advantage of this so that all the residents who are paying utility bills get this notice. So we'll come back to you regarding that once we have a better process in place. But what I would like to say and point out is that we were able to at least quickly act on making sure that our businesses are aware of the bylaw that's in question when it comes to snow and ice removal.
Thank you, Ms. Farocki. So just to wrap up, it's just what we're looking at, that's staff are continually meeting, as Ms. Farocki indicated, and looking at ways of improving and working a little bit better together. And this year, we're going to actually centralize some of the operational work between our Parks group and our Public Works group. So as snow events are happening, we'll be able to optimize the routes and working together on that. I'd just like to note that the 2019 budget is already fully expended, thanks to the event in February. The figure you see is up until April the 30th, so $920,000. As of last week, we're at about 1.05 expended, and that would have included updating equipment in the past over the course of the fall. And so we're not allowed to have any more snow for the rest of the year.
We'll pass a bylaw.
So there's a few other things that the departments are working together on, just optimizing optimizing our routes and our response to some of the core or key transit routes as well. We've been discussing with Nanaimo Ladysmith Public Schools. They're in a similar, have a similar approach to snow clearing. They've got their priorities as well. They're limited budget-wise and personnel as far as being able to respond as quickly as they would like, but their focus is getting the schools open once again. And just to ride, I'd really like to promote the snowplow ride-along video that's on the city's YouTube channel. We had planned on playing it this evening, but I think in light of the hour, I think we can defer that, but just put a plug in for that. That was produced in-house, and it's a really excellent video. And talked a lot about some of the stuff we're challenged with.
That's great.
We hear, it's a frustration, and we get it too, because we experience the same frustration when somebody's cleared their sidewalks and the city comes along and plows it right back on. Part of the reason for that is that we need to ensure that the road will drain. We need to expose the catch basins that are at the edge of the road. And it's a product of what we've sort of inherited, I would say. It's unfortunate, it's frustrating, but we appreciate people's, participation as much as possible. As far as climate change, this is a wild card. As I said, we expect less snow events and a decreasing number of snow days. But I think we also see strange storms coming in, like the February 2019 storm was an example of something that we don't often experience. A 3-week winter is really strange. So with that, Your Worship, I'll close off, and if you have any questions, I'd be pleased to answer.
Councillor Turley.
Thank you, Your Worship. I actually have two questions, one for Ms. Farocki and one for Mr. Sims. We'll start ladies first. So the question I have is, do you have any idea of the uptake by the citizens of the city app that actually provides updated information for garbage pickup? Like I get a message that it's garbage day and what cans I'm supposed to take out. The reason I'm asking is, can that be then used for advising people when a snowstorm happens of what their responsibilities are?
Your Worship,
Your Worship, to Councillor Turley, we certainly do use the Recollect app, especially when it comes to garbage delays due to the snow event.
Yeah, that, okay.
And
yeah.
we have, my understanding, we have close to 11,000 or more individuals who've signed up for that.
My actual, that was part of the question. The other part was, can that app be used to advise people of the fact that they should be clearing their sidewalks, other than just garbage? Is it multi-purpose, or is it just garbage?
Your Worship, to Councillor Turley, it's a good question. I think most people who've signed up for Recollect are just getting information for garbage, so I'd have to consult with Ms. Gurry about any FOIPA issues, but if there isn't, we can certainly use that app as a tool.
Sure. And then the other question I have for Mr. Sims is, given the latest court case result, and I think it was Burnaby, where there was sidewalk being cleared, and of course we experienced melt, freeze here, and there was somebody had cleared their sidewalk, and of course some water melted and then froze, and somebody fell, et cetera. And so I was thinking about that, and I'm thinking, because I'd run into that in the shop as well, it's better, I found it was much better to leave a layer of snow rather than completely clearing the sidewalk. And I was wondering if, when you're plowing, and this may be way out in left field, so I apologize if it is there a way of directing the grit or the salt from the trucks that are plowing over to approximately where the sidewalks are, to try to eliminate some of the concerns about slippery conditions?
Worship, I think that's a good question. I think it does happen in certain residential areas. There's a natural sort of bounce out. But the flip side is we also use brine, and it's trying to keep it efficient. We've got several hundred tons of salt in the salt shed, and we're trying to keep it confined as best we can, not only for economy, but also for lack of impact to vegetation that may be on the road.
Okay.
Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Your Worship. I would just like to say to, if I may, to Mr. Sims, I have no problem whatsoever on the way the city clears roads. I think you do a phenomenal job, especially with the snow that we get. My reason for bringing this forward is to try and encourage a change in what happens after the snow comes down. And that is regarding specifically around commercial properties where typically a good chunk of the bus routes are, where people are coming and going, and that sort of thing, so that we have clear sidewalks. And I appreciate that the 7,000 business fee invoices went out. I get one of those, but I don't actually pay that bill, so I never saw it. And I didn't know that until I saw this report that actually you'd sent them out. So first question is, what sort of feedback have you got from the business community from these business license fee invoices being sent out?
Your Worship, to Councillor Bonner, it was just sent out 2 weeks ago, so I'd have to touch base with the manager of the business license fee. We can get back to you on that.
Okay. My next question is, this communications plan that we have in front of us, do you see it making a difference so that when the snow comes again, hopefully after December 31st, that there will be a change in attitude of people, and not so much residential people, but the commercial folks who we need to plow their sidewalks? And in the event that what we are hoping doesn't happen, what are we going to do the day after that?
Through your Worship, to Councillor Bonner, the first part in regards to communication, we are amplifying our communication and really hoping that people will help their neighbor out. So in one of the pieces that we have done, one of the FAQs on the snow and ice control page is saying that if businesses are going to be away during the winter season, to connect with their neighboring business and look at having their storefront cleared. And we took the opportunity to thank them in advance because we know that if they do this, not only will residents thank them, but their patrons, their customers. So we're trying to use communication as a way to help bring in that community spirit of helping each other out. As for the enforcement side, that is a question for bylaws, which I don't know who can answer that.
Is it, and I buy no bylaws here, so it's an unfair question, but just to state is, the approximately 33,000 each run for residential properties only on an education piece that you outline, and I have it as, can't remember what page it is. Would it not be cheaper just to send around a bylaw officer to issue warning tickets?
Through your worship to Council Bonner, that would be a question again for someone in bylaws.
Okay, thank you.
And if I may, Your Worship, as Mr. LaBerge has said a number of times, this is a challenging enforcement issue. And his common phrase is you treating, hitting a hammer by treating all problems like a nail. And I think there's always a nuance to it. And there is a council policy on focusing on education and voluntary compliance, starting with the downtown area and then moving out to commercial. Regards to downtown, I think our operations staff will be doing a great deal of clearing. There may not be many streets left that need businesses to step out because the city has so many facilities in the downtown core.
Good.
Thank you, Mr. Sims. Thank you, Ms. Farocki. I would just remind council members we have 13 more items under reports that all require votes, save one. The next is item B, the acting mayor's schedule. Ms. Gurry.
Thank you, Worship. I'll try to be quick. This report is before you this evening, as it's a requirement in the community charter, as well as our procedure bylaw, that every year an acting mayor's schedule is provided for council to adopt. So the schedule in front of you has been generated by a random selector program, and there is the ability for councillors to switch, should they so choose, via motion. Otherwise, I'm looking for adoption of this calendar or some version of it from you.
So I move.
Motion, Councillor.
Motion that council approve the 2020 acting mayor's schedule.
Seconded, Councillor Armstrong. Any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much. The next is 2020 council key calendar date. Ms. Gurry.
Thank you, Worship. Not unlike the last report, the community charter and our procedure bylaw require a calendar of scheduled council meetings for the next year. So this calendar before you is the proposed schedule for council meetings for 2020.
Move the recommendation.
Second.
Discussion. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much. Next is 2020 appointment to the Vancouver Island Regional Library Board of Directors. I understand, talking to council, that someone is going to make the motion that it be Councillor Hemmons and alternate be Councillor Thorpe. And Councillor Martman, you're making that motion?
Yes, move that council appoint one trustee and one alternate to the Vancouver Island Regional Library Board for a one-year term, 2020 January 1st to 2020 December 31st.
And that's Councillor Hemmons and Councillor Thorpe is the alternate, correct? They're seconded. Councillor Armstrong, any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much. The next is the Affordable Housing Strategy Annual Update. And Mr. Well, there's no butter tarts to lure him away. There it is. It's lovely to see a grand entrance, but Affordable Housing Strategy 2019 Annual Update. Mr. Lindsay, please.
I can report there are no butter tarts, Your Worship.
Thank you, and apologize for making you wait there. So this report is simply an update for information. There was a presentation that was received at the Health and Housing Task Force last week on this item. When the plan was adopted last year, there was a commitment to come back annually with an update. We had originally planned this evening, there's an attachment of a PowerPoint which was included at Health and Housing for Council's review. And I think we had originally planned to have staff here to make that presentation, but given the hour and the size of your agenda, I think we'll defer that and certainly prepared to take any questions though.
Any questions for Mr. Lindsay? Let me ask this question quickly. Are we on target with respect to any targets set out in the plan?
Sorry, Worship, I think it's the first or second slide in the PowerPoint that talks specifically about the targets, and it notes that on a number of these, thank you, someone's brought it up, thank you. So we noticed that on a number of these that we're actually exceeding our targets when it comes around housing starts for rental, and which is one of the key initiatives that was identified under the strategy, was increasing rental in the community. So certainly on track or exceeding in a number of fronts.
Don't you like when I ask questions that allow you to brag a little? Councillor Martman?
Oh, there's no motion here.
No. Any further questions for Mr. Lindsay? Thank you very much. The next is Global Covenant of Mayors Canada and Showcase Cities Pilot Project. Mr. Lindsay.
Thank you, Worship. In this case, Council may recall that earlier this year, the city was accepted to participate in this program along with 24 communities across the country. As part of this process, if we're ultimately commit to proceed, will include technical support for us as we work aggressively to reduce greenhouse gas emissions within the community. But in order to finally proceed with the program, it requires a commitment from Council, and we're here this evening to seek that in the form of a letter of a commitment, which is attached as Schedule A to your package.
Thank you very much. Councillor Martman.
Thank you. I move that Council support participation in the Global Covenant of Mayors Canada Showcase Cities Pilot Project and endorse the Mayor's letter of commitment.
Seconded, Councillor Armstrong. Any discussion? Councillor Turley.
Thank you, Worship. Through you to Mr. Lindsay. Given the fact that greenhouse gases are more than just CO2 and MH4, how and who measures the reduction?
Your Worship, that's an excellent question. I think there's two parts to that answer, and often there's this whole confusion about GHGs versus CO2s, and there's references back and forth. And in many cases, you'll see CO2 equivalents used when they're talking about other emissions that may generate greenhouse gases. In terms of who measures, this is one of those problems that I think even Council in your earlier resolution for climate emergency identified the need to have the province help us in that regard. And they were early in 2010, 2012, were providing some data to municipalities, but have stopped that. So one of the struggles that one of the issues we'll need to overcome as we move forward is coming up with an ability to measure locally in something that we can repeat easily enough on our own to try to get a real measure. But that'll be one of the first steps of the Sustainability Action Plan, is coming up with that baseline measurement.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks very much. No further discussion. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. The next is amendment to rates and charges for sanitary sewer. Ms. Mercer. And Ms. Wardle.
Thank you, Your Worship. I think you haven't seen enough of us today. So the purpose of this report is to introduce the sanitary sewer rates bylaw for first, second, and third readings. So as per our budget discussions, effective January 1st, 2020, sewer fees are proposed to be increased by 4%, or $5.40 per single-family house, and that will bring the annual cost for a single-family home to $140.58. And the increase is required to fund long-term asset management plans for the city's sanitary sewer system.
Thank you. Councillor Martman?
Thank you. Move that sewer regulation and charge amendment bylaw 2019, number .2496.32, to set the 2020 rates for sanitary sewer pass first reading.
Seconded, Councillor Thorpe. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries.
Move that sewer regulation and charge amendment bylaw 2019, number 2496.32, pass second reading.
Seconded, Councillor Thorpe. Any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries.
Move that sewer regulation and charge amendment bylaw 2019, number 2496.32, pass third reading.
Seconded, Councillor Thorpe. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Councillor Martman, amendments to rates and charges for water. Or no, I guess we'll let Ms. Mercer introduce it. I'm rushing.
Thank you.
Aren't I? Must be the hour.
Yeah, exactly. Who wants to talk about sewer rates at 20 after 10? The purpose of this report is
Crap
to
all the
introduce water rates bylaw for first, second, and third readings. And the purpose, or the bylaw proposes to increase water fees, as we've discussed, by 7.5%, effective January 1st, 2020. And it will apply to all properties. And the two components that make up this change are, as the city's strategic water supply plan calls for an extensive investment in water treatment and supply infrastructure over the next few decades, a 5% increase is in water rates is proposed to be added to fund this investment. In addition, there's a 2.5% increase as needed to cover the costs relating to long-term asset management programs for both water supply and distribution. So the total impact of this proposed change on a typical single-family household is $41.45, and that's based on 220 gallons per day. And this will bring the annual cost for a single-family home to approximately $594 per year. As well, we made some housekeeping changes to the bylaw to reference the GM of Engineering and Public Works, as before it was referenced to the director. And we have two other fee changes to it. We now have a computerized system for our bulk water hauler filling stations. And so we've added two charges, one $50 charge for a one-time application fee and a $20 fee for replacement cards for it. So that's how they access these systems. So that's what's before you for first three readings.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Councillor Martman.
Move that Waterworks Rate and Regulation Amendment Bylaw 2019, number 7004.15, to set the 2020 water rates pass first reading.
Seconded, Councillor Hemmens. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Councillor
Move
Martman.
that Waterworks Rate and Regulation Amendment Bylaw 2019, number 7004.15, pass second reading.
Seconded, Councillor Hemmens. Any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you.
Move that Waterworks Rate and Regulation Amendment Bylaw 2019, number 7004.15, pass third reading.
Seconded, Councillor Hemmens. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. The next is amendment to rates and charges for municipal solid waste collection. Ms. Mercer.
Thank you, Your Worship. So again, this bylaw for municipal solid waste is up for first three readings. The proposed fee increase is a 0.5% for 2020, and this will bring the annual cost to $171 for a household, and that's an increase of $1 over 2019. And like the water bylaw, we may have some housekeeping changes to reference the GM rather than the director.
Thank you. Move that Municipal Solid Waste Collection Amendment Bylaw 2019, number 7128.11, to update the bylaw to set rates for 2020 pass first reading.
Seconded, Councillor Hemmens. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Councillor Martman.
Move that Municipal Solid Waste Collection Amendment Bylaw 2019, number 7128.11, pass second reading.
Seconded, Councillor Hemmens. Any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Councillor Martman.
Motion that Municipal Solid Waste Collection Amendment Bylaw 2019, number 7128.11, pass third reading.
Seconded, Councillor Hemmens. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. The next is amendment to bulk water rates for Southwest Extension. Ms. Mercer.
Thank you. Again, this bylaw is up for first, second, and third readings. So in a little bit of background, in 2004, the Water Supply Service established under the former Greater Nanaimo Water District Act was transferred to the City of Nanaimo, making the city responsible for the provision of water to the Southwest Extension Water Works District. And in your report, there is a map showing where that is located within the area. And under the city's legislation, the city's fees cannot, or under legislation, the city's fees cannot exceed the cost of providing the service. So based on a 5-year average, the annual water consumption volume, a rate of $2.95 per 1,000 gallons is proposed. And this rate is higher due to increase in asset management reserve funding and project capital work.
Thank you very much. Councillor
Move
Martin.
that Southwest Bulk Water Rate Amendment Bylaw 2019, number 7099.08, to set the 2020 bulk rate water rates for Southwest Extension past first reading.
Seconded, Councillor Thorpe this time, I think. Beat you to the punch. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries.
Move that Southwest Bulk Water Rate Amendment Bylaw 2019, number 7099.08, pass second reading.
Seconded, Councillor Thorpe. Any discussion? All those in favor? Motion carries.
Move that Southwest Bulk Water Rate Amendment Bylaw 2019, number 7099.08, pass third reading.
Seconded, Councillor Thorpe. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much. The next is appointment of bylaw enforcement officer. Mr. Lindsay. Very good of you to stand in for Mr. LaBerge tonight.
I'm here. Thank you, Your Worship. Just a brief report seeking Council's endorsement of making Mike Sherman a recognized bylaw enforcement officer. Mr. Sherman works for the Nanaimo Animal Control, and this would be part of his normal duties.
Move that council appoint Mike Sherman as a bylaw enforcement officer to enforce provisions of City of Nanaimo Licensing and Control of Animals Bylaw 1995, number 4923, and Parks, Recreation, and Culture Regulation Bylaw 2008, number 7073.
Seconded, Councillor Hemmens. All those in, any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. The next is development permit application number DP 1132-4474 Wellington Road.
Thank you, Worship. As you mentioned, development permit on the subject property. Maybe I could ask that, well, you're ahead of me again, Schedule G, the air photo I was going to ask to be brought up. It's already on your screen. It's important, I believe, Your Worship, in this case, because a lot of the, many of the variances that are being sought are in relation to the unusual nature of this panhandle property. So the development permit application, to back up, is for a mixed-use development of office and 8 residential units. And as noted in the report, there are variances related to building height and building setback, buffers from garbage enclosures, parking and location of parking related to the building, and dimensions of the loading space. And specifically, Your Worship, I was mentioning this lot under the bylaw that technically the frontage is Wellington Road, but for all intents and purposes, the frontage that's exposed to the public is along the rear. So many of the variances are in the rear. And related to bringing that building closer to the ENN and ultimately to the presence it would have on the Island Highway. Access continue to be from Wellington Road, of course, but the building would very much have a focus towards the Island Highway.
I'm going to ask for the motion first, and then Councillor Brown wants to say something. Councillor Martin.
Move that council issue development permit number DP 1132 at 4474 Wellington Road with the following variances as printed.
Seconded, Councillor Hemmens. And I'm going to go to Councillor Brown, please.
Thank you, Worship, and through you to staff, I just want to follow up on a few of the Design Advisory Panel comments. I understand that they are structured as consider. I'm just trying to follow some of the changes that were made. The first one is in respect to the loading zone. The designer panel had expressed some concern about its proximity to the front door, and maybe moving it slightly away from the front door. I'm not clear, I noticed some of the labels are gone, but I just don't know if that's actually been changed on the site plan. I can't find the new loading bay, I guess.
Sorry, Your Worship, we're just looking that one up. Was there a second question that we
Sure,
can answer
yeah,
while we look that one up?
I can, two more. The design panel also commented that it is sort of a challenging lot due to the panhandle, but there is a sidewalk that comes down with hopes that it would be lit, and there was some comment around sort of a textural change on the asphalt connecting the sidewalk with the street to the concrete sidewalk that runs into the entrances. And again, looking at the site plan, I don't see that change, but I don't understand. There might be issues with relocating the loading bay, but in this one, I don't understand what would constrain that change. Oh, sorry, Councillor Bonner is showing me, which site plan is that?
This is the attachment C.
Attachment C.
Second one down, you may not have come on.
One thing for certain, I couldn't possibly help find it.
Oh, okay, I scratched that. Councillor Bonner has showed me. There's a few site plans in there, so Councillor Bonner showed me one that does show that change.
So attachment C, I think if anybody else is looking, shows the walkway.
And so the final one, there was comments because the highway is so visible around, and I will say the applicant did respond to some of these changes quite well, and like I said, it's a challenging site, but there was some comment around the landscaping on the back portion, or the rear elevation, which actually faces onto the highway, around I'm just read the exact motion, or the exact recommendation. Consider ways to blend utility doors to the exterior color palette and provide additional landscape screening in front of the exposed parking area wall. And just trying to identify those changes as well, because it looks to be the same as the original submitted.
So, Your Worship, Mr. Holm look through the report to see if we can comment on those specifically. What I would say in general is that the design panel will make its recommendations, and staff will work with the applicant to evaluate those recommendations, but at the end of the day, those are recommendations, and if for some reason they're not able to be incorporated in the plan, it may be possible that the same plan is being brought forward as what was shown to the design panel. So if it is a similar plan as what was reviewed at the panel, that I'm anticipating that those were reviewed and deemed to be that we are unable to comply with the recommendations of the panel.
Thank you. I'm just, when the report does say the applicant has adequately addressed the DAP recommendations through design revisions. And I understand there may be some that they can't make it work. There's no distinction between which ones were adequately addressed and which ones might not have been.
My apologies, Your Worship. We'll have to follow up, I think, with council and get some more clarity around those. Certainly happy to provide that.
Well, I have to apologize also because I cut Councillor Martman off before she could read the 5 sections of the notice of motion, I believe, as well.
I said it's printed.
As printed. Thank you. Good, you saved me. Bless your heart. Any further discussion on the motion? All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. The next is Development Variance Permit Application Number DVP 398-5485 Godfrey Road. Mr. Lindsay, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. As you mentioned, Development Variance Permit Application for the subject property. I would note that this is for a variance for accessory buildings, and under the bylaw for the zoning for the majority of the properties in the city, there's a limit of a maximum of 90 square meters for accessory buildings, or 13% of the lot area, whichever is lower. In this case, the property is just over 1,100 square meters. And the applicants are proposing an increase from 90 square meters to 119 square meters to allow for multiple accessory buildings, and that would equate to approximately about 10% of the lot area as accessory building. So still under that 13% of the bylaw, it does require a variance as it's over 90 square meters.
Thank you very much. Is there anyone wishing to speak to DVP 398? What a surprise. I don't see anyone. Councillor Martin.
I move that council issue development variance permit number DVP 398 at 5485 Godfrey Road with the following variance: increase the maximum gross floor area for all accessory buildings from 90 square meters to 119 square meters.
Seconder, Councillor Hemmons. Any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. And the last one here is N liquor license application number LA 140-6359 Hammond Bay Road. This is for information only, but somewhat interesting. Liquor being served at a spa, Mr. Lindsay?
Thank you, Your Worship. Just confirming what you mentioned, that this is of course just an information report to advise council that we have received an application. A referral has been made from the province. As part of council's process, it will now move forward to a public hearing. So that's going to come to your public hearing in January before we'll be returning to council for a recommendation on the referral.
Thank you very much.
Worship, could I just ask a question?
Oh, sorry, Councillor Thorpe.
Oh, careful. Thank you, Your Worship. I realize this is just for information, but I'm curious. Since the provincial government changed their policy on that, I don't recall us having prior applications. Is this the first one?
Thank you, Worship. I had that same discussion with staff when this application came in. I think we were anticipating that we would have saw more during this time, but this is, I believe, the first one of this nature. It does mean, since you raised the question, it does mean that we'll probably have to look at our approvals process. The process we have put in place right now is really set up, to be honest, for liquor primary uses, for nightclubs. And if we're going to start to see numerous applications of liquor licensing as an ancillary or secondary use, we might have to come up with a different process. But we'll report back to council on that.
Thank you.
I'm sure it'll be a very popular spot, potentially. Councillor Bonner.
Thank you, Worship. And my question, if I may, is we, a long time ago, and I think maybe in the last council, approved liquor licenses in some distilleries that were making alcohol, and then they wanted to have a nice place, of which I've been to one. It's very nice there. Would that follow under this same type of rule?
Your Worship, I think that's an excellent example of just the changing nature of liquor licensing and how we've seen a variety of that come in a variety of forms, and I think it speaks to the need to kind of reconsider how we do how do we gather community input on each of these applications, given there's a real difference between a large nightclub and a spa or boutique that wants to provide wine during the afternoon. So I think we need to respond to those differently.
Very good. On to bylaws. A, zoning bylaw amendment, bylaw 2019, number 4500.158.
Move that zoning bylaw amendment, bylaw 2019, number 4500.158, to make general text and mapping amendments to City of Nanaimo zoning bylaw 2011, number 4500, be adopted.
Seconder, Councillor Hemmons. Any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. The next is zoning amendment bylaw number 2019, number 4500.161. Councillor Martin.
Move that zoning amendment bylaw 2019, number 4500.161, to rezone 120 Commercial Street to allow cannabis retail stores as site-specific use in the core DT1 zone be adopted.
Seconded. Councillor Armstrong. Any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. The bylaw status information sheet, bylaw status sheet for information only. Councillor Bonner.
I had a question, but it doesn't necessarily mean to be for this, but it was just a question from staff Do we have the number of Canada's retail stores that have now gone to final reading?
So Your Worship, I don't have the exact number, but I believe it's approximately half a dozen now that have made it through that far. I do know that there are, we believe now, 2 that have actually gone the next step beyond that and received final approval from the province. So that's 2 of the 20 applications that have come through council.
Thank you.
Very good. Next, notices of motion, we have none. And finally, question period, Mr. Manners, 13B.
Council, I have 2 questions for you. The first one is, I missed it earlier when you did the motion regarding the library appointees. Did we move with 2 appointees to the library board? And who were they?
Councillors Hemmons as the appointee and Councillor Thorpe as the alternate.
Thank you. So my question is relating to the bylaw or the deferred motion.
The second one, relating to
The
childcare.
second one, B, regarding childcare. And while I agree with what many of you said, I had the same thoughts that you had, Mayor Krog and Councillor Thorpe and some of the others. And I thought, no. But I'm not sure if you've noticed, but the library board appointees that you made today will be reimbursed for child care services. So a precedent has been set. It's been set by the library board. So that is something that I'm asking you, my question is, that you consider that as you move forward. Thank you.
Very interesting question, Mr. Manners, and you've asked us to consider, and I'm sure we will.
Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Now, unless anyone has anything further, I'd welcome a motion for adjournment. Moved Councillor Brown, seconded Councillor Turley. All those in favor? Very good.
I'll give Minister